Chapter 1326. After obtaining such a harvest, Luo Fan no longer had the intention to stay in the auction house. He directly put the level 6 pseudo-sage treasure into his universe in his sleeve. With a slight thought, his figure disappeared from the platform and appeared at the exit of the auction house. After he left, the platform trembled slightly and turned from solid to illusory. Its presence gradually faded, and soon it completely disappeared. It was as if there had never been such a platform in the auction space. Compared to what Luo Fan had seen before, the number of platforms in this auction space had roughly doubled. Obviously, during the period of time he had been here, there were almost as many cultivators that had come to the auction house. Naturally, there were no accidents when he left the auction house. Soon, he arrived at the street outside. This auction house wasn't the largest or most magnificent building on the entire Qinggong Island, and it wasn't the core of this treasure conference either. This was inevitable. The treasure discussion conference would last for an entire 10 years, so the most important event naturally had to appear at the very end in order to be considered the correct procedure. After walking around, Luo Fan discovered that after seeing the many auction items in the auction house, the things displayed outside were no longer attractive to him. Feeling helpless, he could not be bothered to continue searching. He found a corner of Qinggong Island and casually opened up a world. Then he dived into that world. There was nothing else in this world, and it was just a piece of nothingness. This entire world did not have any special effects. It didn't have any other special effects. It was just a simple isolation. It isolated all probing and power from the outside world. However, it was the best place for cultivation. I wonder where Hu Yun obtained the method to refine a treasure embryo. Could it be from the location of the primordial world that she obtained? Luo Fan recalled his experience in the auction house and could not help but feel a little curious. The popularity of the embryonic magic treasure was beyond his imagination. It was only a level 1 pseudo-sage treasure, but there was actually a cultivator who was willing to exchange a level 6 pseudo-sage treasure for it. Furthermore, it was a level 6 pseudo-sage treasure that had completely erased all his imprints and did not leave any aura that belonged to him. Although the others were surprised that the cultivator could take out a magic treasure of this level, they were shocked. However, he did not feel that it was too ridiculous. Evidently, they felt that this treasure embryo might not be worth the grade 6 pseudo-sane artifact, but its value wasn't too far off. Using a grade 6 pseudo-sage artifact to exchange for it was a little too much. But it wasn't completely worthless. In such a situation, it was enough to see that this was an embryonic magical treasure. How popular it was. However, it was under such circumstances that Hu Yun directly gave him the method to refine the embryonic magic weapon. Handed over to Luo Fan. She simply seemed as if she didn't take the method to refine this embryonic magic treasure seriously at all, and she directly took it to be common knowledge that cultivators had to know. This couldn't help but cause Luo Fan to be surprised, and he wondered if she knew how precious the method to refine this magic treasure was. With a thought, a ball appeared in front of him. After this sphere appeared, it shook slightly and turned into a large area that was enveloped by gray mist. In this area, there were tens of thousands of worlds densely packed together. After thinking about it, he raised his hand and pointed. From his sleeve, another world flew out and entered the gray mist. There were tens of thousands of worlds side by side. These were all the worlds that he had obtained from Hu Yun. None of these worlds were ordinary worlds, and none of them could be replicated. They were strange worlds that could only be produced by coincidence. Why did these worlds look like this? Why do they have such mysteries? All of these contained all kinds of deeper mysteries of the world, showing the many mysteries of the combination of time, space, matter, and energy, these four basic existences. Each of these worlds was essentially not strong for Luo Fan. He could crush countless of them with a single hand. However, it was precisely such worlds that made Luo Fan feel that his ability to open up a world could be improved by comprehending them. This is the painting realm. With ink as everything in the world, the four basic existences are all distorted and deformed. It's quite amazing. This is the book realm. Everything in the world is actually a variety of books, and even the Yuan Qi is a text. This is the flower realm. This is the magma realm. Luo Fan looked at the worlds one by one and gained a deeper understanding of these worlds. He faintly felt that his understanding of the world had become deeper. Perhaps his ability to open up a world did not improve much because of this, and he could not open up a world of a higher level than what he could originally open up. However, it was enough for him to control the types of worlds that he opened up more freely, and he could open up many mysterious worlds that he had never thought of before. Although such gains were not very obvious, it was enough to make Luo Fan feel that he had gained a lot, and his heart was filled with inexplicable joy. Time passed quickly. One day, when Luo Fan had already comprehended more than 100 worlds, there was suddenly an inexplicable feeling that was transmitted to his heart through some extremely mysterious mechanism. So its fellow Taoist black turtle. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat, and he could not help but smile as he sensed the reason. He stopped comprehending the world, and with a wave of his hand, the tens of thousands of worlds instantly shrank, and in the blink of an eye, the entire area that contained tens of thousands of worlds turned into a very simple, fist-sized pill that fell into his hand. After putting the existence of these tens of thousands of worlds into his sleeve world, Luo Fan lifted a step and stepped out of the world that he had casually opened up. As he stepped out of that world, the world of nothingness shook slightly, and then completely collapsed, and finally disappeared without a trace. As soon as Luo Fan appeared, the time and space around his body shook slightly. Then two figures appeared there, and they were none other than Taoist Black Turtle and Taoist Bei Shi. Both of them had smiles on their faces, and Taoist Black Turtle said, "So fellow Taoist was cultivating here. It took us a long time to find you." Luo Fan chuckled. "I exchanged some things before, and my heart was itching, so I stayed here to comprehend for a while. Please forgive me for causing you trouble." "Why do you say that, fellow Taoist? We were the ones who were anxious. Fortunately, we haven't missed the Real Treasure Discourse Conference yet. Why don't we hurry to the conference?" Taoist Black Turtle chuckled. He did not ask what Luo Fan had obtained that made him so itchy. It was the other party's secret in the first place, and since the other party did not say, it was not his place to ask. "The Real Treasure Discourse Conference has already begun?" Luo Fan's eyes lit up. He asked. He was very interested in the Treasure Discourse Conference. The items in the auction house previously were not the most precious on Chungong Island, but they were already enough for him to watch with great interest. He felt that his horizons had been broadened, and he was naturally even more interested in the higher-level Treasure Discourse Conference. His heart skipped a beat. After some calculations, he realized that several years had passed unknowingly. There was less than a year left until the end of the Treasure Discourse Conference on Chungong Island. At this time, it was time for the highlight of the event to begin. That's right. It would be a pity to come to Chungong Island without experiencing the Treasure Discourse Conference. Taoist Priest Sad World said with a smile. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. Luo Fan chuckled. Taoist Black Turtle and Taoist Priest Sad World also smiled. Then the three of them took light steps, seemingly slow but actually fast. In a short while, they arrived at a palace in the center of Chungong Island. This was in fact Chungong. What a wonderful palace. It looks completely different from when it was activated and when it was not. Luo Fan looked at the palace and could not help but sigh. Previously, when he was wandering around on this Chun Palace Island, he also wandered around this area and saw this Chun Palace. However, there was a world of difference between the Chun Palace back then and the current Chun Palace. Back then, although Chungong Palace looked majestic and grand, it was just an ordinary palace and was no different from ordinary palaces in the secular world. Even Luo Fan did not have a desire to enter such a palace. But the current Chungong Palace was completely different from before. The current Chun Palace didn't look any different from before, but the feeling it gave people was completely different. Everything that was originally very ordinary had now returned to its original state of subtlety and profoundness. The places that originally seemed to be flaws had now completely turned into advantages. An indescribable nobility, perfection, and power slowly seeped out from Chun-Gong Palace. At this time, the aura above the entire Chun-Gong Palace surged. That incomparably powerful aura seemed to contain a large number of terrifying cultivators. How could such a palace be an ordinary palace in the secular world? It had clearly become the residence of the gods above the 9 heavens. Luo Fan stood in front of this Chun-Gong Palace, full of admiration. Taoist Mysterious Turtle and Taoist Beishur were also full of admiration at this time. Taoist Mysterious Turtle said, "Although I have seen it countless times, I still can't help but feel a little shocked every time I see the changes in this Chun-Gong Palace. There are no changes at all, but it gives people such a completely different, almost too extreme impressions. This method is really beyond imagination." Exactly. I don't know how Senior Hizun did this. Taoist Beishur also sighed. Of course, the three of them could not just stand outside this Chun-Gong Palace. They just paused for a moment and sighed with emotion about the mysteries of this Chun-Gong Palace. The three of them entered together. Upon entering, what entered one's eyes was a boundless void. Floating platforms could be seen floating in the air. Of course, this platform was completely different from the auction house. The platform in the auction house completely concealed everyone inside, making it impossible for people to see what was happening on the platform through the barrier above the platform. However, this was not the case for the platforms inside the Chun-Gong Palace. The platform here looked like a very ordinary platform. Each platform was not big. At a glance, it was easy to see who was on those platforms and what they were doing. Moreover, in this Chun-Gong Palace, there was also a powerful and indescribable suppressive force suppressing everything, making it so that no one could tell how strong or weak they were. It seemed that every single one of them was just an ordinary person, regardless of whether it was their aura or anything else. However, it was completely different from what they felt from the outside. This kind of suppressive force was extremely strange and powerful. The moment Luo Fan and the other two stepped into this Chun-Gong Palace, they also felt the same suppressive force acting on them. However, the way this suppressive force manifested was extremely strange. It did not forcefully suppress everything, but it seemed to be a very gentle force that wrapped around the existence being suppressed by this suppressive force, making it impossible for their aura and other things to leak out. At the same time, it also made it impossible for the suppressed person to exert their own strength. But it did not make the suppressed person feel any discomfort. It was as if they did not use their magical power. It was not that they were suppressed to the point that they could not exert their strength, but they were just unwilling to do so. This kind of silent, nourishing change. Luo Fan could not help but feel shocked again. The power of the revered one is indeed beyond my imagination. After sensing that he was not affected at all, but he could not exert the power that he should have, Luo Fan finally could not help but exclaim in admiration. If such a wonderful suppressive force could be achieved by a cultivator who is not a level 9 pseudo-sage, Luo Fan would not believe it. Therefore, to Luo Fan, this kind of change in this Chun-Gong Palace could only be done by the only level 9 pseudo-sage cultivator on this island. That's natural. Taoist Divine Turtle smiled. After they stepped into this Chun-Gong Palace, a platform naturally appeared under their feet, allowing them to join the many platforms that were previously suspended in the void. The three of them looked at each other and smiled faintly. With a thought, the three platforms leaned against each other. Although they weren't completely integrated, they were very close to each other and weren't much different from one body. What are the rules of this treasure conference? Luo Fan asked with a smile. There are actually no rules in the treasure conference. Anyone can take out anything that they think is valuable, and if others find it interesting, they can take out something to exchange, Taoist Divine Turtle explained. I see. This is similar to an auction. Luo Fan nodded to show that he understood. In essence, it is similar. But, generally speaking, the items that appear here are of a much higher level than those in the auction. Moreover, even a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure has appeared in the past, Taoist divine turtle said. A level 9 pseudo-sage treasure? Luo Fan finally felt an inexplicable shock when he heard this. A level 9 pseudo-sage treasure was a powerful existence. Any cultivator who obtained such an existence would have an astonishing guarantee of safety. Even in the face of a level 8 pseudo-sage, they would have a chance to escape. Such an existence actually appeared in a treasure conference like this, and was actually taken out to be exchanged. Luo Fan instinctively did not want to believe it, but after thinking about it, he knew that there was no reason for Taoist Divine Turtle and Taoist Divine Turtle to lie to him. All that was left in his heart was shock. That's right. Unfortunately, I didn't participate in that session. I don't know who took out a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure and what it was exchanged for. Taoist Divine Turtle sighed. I didn't participate in that session either. I wasn't qualified to participate in this treasure conference back then. However, I heard that even Senior Hizun was alarmed during that session, and it almost led to a tragedy, Taoist Divine Turtle said with a smile. When Luo Fan heard their words, he looked forward to this treasure conference even more. While they were talking, people stepped into the palace one after another. Because everyone was suppressed by a suppressive force as soon as they stepped into the Chun Palace, they could not even release their auras. Therefore, Luo Fan could not tell how strong these cultivators were. Among them, were there any high-level pseudo-sage existences, or were there any existences so weak that they were not even quasi-sage existences? The moment these cultivators stepped into the palace, platforms naturally condensed under their feet and carried them to the numerous platforms around them. They became a part of the scenery in the Chun Palace. The platforms here were all the same size and appearance, and none of them changed size according to the strength of the cultivators on them. This kind of structure obviously had great benefits. Since they did not know the strength of others, they naturally did not dare to be presumptuous towards others. Since cultivators did not dare to be presumptuous towards others, this treasure conference could only be carried out within the framework set by Hizun. All kinds of meaningless conflicts would naturally be greatly reduced, this was for sure. After all, you did not know if the person you wanted to provoke was a powerful existence that could casually slap you into meat paste. Under this kind of unknown situation, the only thing they could do was to act according to the rules, not provoke anyone, and not vent their emotions on anyone else. After Luo Fan and the others arrived at the Chun Palace, they waited for another day before the number of people gradually decreased. By this time, the number of platforms in the palace had already reached tens of thousands. Almost all the cultivators who came to participate in this time's treasure conference were already here. Chapter 13:27. After another half a day, the gate of the Chun Palace slowly closed. While communicating with the others, Luo Fan already knew that this meant that the real treasure discussion was about to begin. At this moment, a figure appeared out of thin air on a platform that was larger than usual in the center of the hall. Compared to all of the other living beings present who were completely ordinary and had all of their extraordinariness suppressed, there was a world of difference between this figure and the rest of the living beings present. Although there was no aura, the indescribable charm made anyone who saw this figure immediately know that this figure was an existence that could easily crush them to death. That high and mighty, eternal and noble temperament showed to all living beings in the world that this person was extraordinary. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that this person must be a level 9 pseudo-sage, Hizun. Only a level 9 pseudo-sage existence could be so powerful, and only an existence that was closest to the sage realm could make everyone feel this inexplicable feeling just with their temperament. The gap between level 9 pseudo-sage is really too huge. Luo Fan sighed. Any level 8 pseudo-sage he had seen before was worlds apart from level 9 pseudo-sage. He was currently a level 3 pseudo-sage, but he was not afraid of level 6 pseudo-sage. He was also confident in escaping from level 7 pseudo-sage. In fact, he even had the idea of creating all kinds of special environments to escape from level 8 pseudo-sage. However, he was facing level 9 pseudo-sage. He had no such thoughts at all. He knew very well that he was simply an ant in front of level 9 pseudo-sage. He knew very well that he was simply an ant in front of level 9 pseudo-sage. At least, almost all level 9 pseudo-sage he had seen were so powerful that he could not even think of fighting against them. Of course, the reason for this was not because the gap between level 8 pseudo-sage and level 9 pseudo-sage was so huge. In fact, the gap between level 8 pseudo-sage and level 9 pseudo-sage was similar to the gap between level 2 pseudo-sage and level 3 pseudo-sage. If one had to quantify it, it would only be a difference of a few hundred times. Although this was already an extremely huge gap, it was still acceptable to Luo Fan. To him, such a huge increase wasn't enough to make him feel despair. However, there was nothing he could do. The gap between the level 9 pseudo-saint realm was unimaginable. If he wanted to step into the sage realm and become a sage from the 9th grade pseudo-sage realm, he would need to increase his strength by tens of thousands of times. Which of the level 9 pseudo-sage cultivators Luo Fan had not cultivated for hundreds of millions of years? Which one of them didn't become a level 9 pseudo-sage a long time ago? Such existences did not stop their pursuit of becoming saints. Naturally, the improvement of his strength would not stop. Under such circumstances, coupled with the fact that the grade 9 pseudo-sage realm was almost infinite, it was easy to imagine how much they would improve in there. In other words, it could be said that Luo Fan had encountered a level 9 pseudo-sage existence. They were not just level 9 pseudo-saints, but had been cultivating at this level for countless years. They might have even taken a few more steps and were already extremely close to the sage realm. Such existences were naturally countless times stronger than level 8 pseudo-sages. For Luo Fan, the pressure was naturally beyond imagination. Luo Fan didn't think about this at first, but when he saw the unimaginably powerful Hizun in front of him, all these thoughts emerged in his mind, and he instantly grasped the truth. It's a pity. If such a level 9 pseudo-sage could obtain a primitive world, he might be able to become a sage in the demon realm soon. Luo Fan sighed. Each of these level 9 pseudo-sages had almost reached the end of their path of cultivation. Perhaps they were only left with one chance and one key to become a sage. Thinking of this, Luo Fan became more and more worried. He was worried that the existence of the primitive world that he had would be of use to Hizun, and whether it would cause Hizun to go crazy. Hizun swept his gaze across the entire Qin Palace. At this moment, everyone felt as if they were being suppressed by a terrifying world, and their bodies couldn't help but tremble slightly. Fortunately, Hizun quickly shifted his gaze. Otherwise, most people might have lost their composure. Huh! Suddenly, Hizun let out a soft cry of surprise and looked in a direction. This direction was impressively where Luo Fan was located. Being stared at by this gaze, Luo Fan suddenly felt uncomfortable all over, and his heart almost jumped out of his chest. He was almost certain that this was clearly the special aura that Hizun had sensed from him. However, he didn't know how much Hizun had sensed, and whether he had really discovered the primitive world that he had hidden. A trace of doubt flashed in Hizun's eyes. However, he didn't do anything, as if he really hadn't sensed it clearly. His gaze quickly shifted and turned to the other side. After quickly sweeping his gaze across everyone present, Hizun said, "This year's treasure discussion will now begin. This year's treasure discussion will follow the same rules as before. Any fellow Taoist can bring out a treasure for everyone to appraise and exchange with others. If no fellow Taoist brings out a treasure for 10 consecutive days, or if it has been a year, I will take out a treasure and end this year's treasure discussion." This rule was exactly the same as the previous few times, and there was nothing much to say. After Hizun finished speaking, he smiled slightly and nodded towards everyone present. His figure slowly dissipated, as if he had never appeared. However, everyone present knew that Hizun didn't leave. He had merely hidden himself. Everything that happened in the Chun Palace was under his eyes, and nothing was missed. This time, Senior Hizun seems to be a bit anxious. In the past, he would still give a lecture. Taoist priest Bei Shi said after Hizun's figure disappeared. He was the disciple of a sage. Although he was a disciple, his identity was different. Even though he knew that Hizun was watching, he didn't have many misgivings and said such words. Luo Fan heard this and sighed inwardly. He sighed to himself that it was good to have a backer, and then asked, "Is that so? Isn't it always like this?" Of course not. In the past, he would preach the Tao for at least a month. The reason why so many people are attracted to this treasure discussion isn't entirely because they can exchange for the treasures they need here. A large part of the reason is because of Senior. He's preaching the Tao for a period of time at the beginning. I didn't expect Senior Hizun to be so busy this time. I'm sure many fellow Taoists will be disappointed, Taoist priest Bei Shi said with a smile. Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood. He also knew why Taoist priest Bei Shi and the others were so eager for him to participate in this treasure discussion. It turned out that they wanted to share some of the opportunities of listening to a level 9 fake sage's lectures with him. Although he was secretly grateful, he didn't say much on the surface. Taoist priest Bei Shi could give such an evaluation because he had a backer. He didn't have any, so he naturally couldn't say anything. Didn't you see that even Taoist divine Turtle didn't dare to speak at this time? As they spoke, a cultivator had already arrived on the platform where Senior Hizun was. In his hand was a treasure that looked like a pagoda, and he began to introduce it. That treasure seemed to have been unsealed on the platform and began to emit a powerful aura that filled the entire Qin Palace. Of course, although this aura was powerful, it didn't cause any negative impact on any cultivator on the platform. It was as if the platforms themselves had the ability to defend against auras. Although the cultivators on the platforms could clearly feel that this aura was extremely powerful, they didn't feel as uncomfortable as if they had encountered an aura that exceeded their endurance. As expected, the grade is much higher than the auction house. It's just a level 8 fake sage treasure. Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim, "Haha, fellow Taoist, you misunderstand. This is it's considered precious in the treasure discussion. Normally, level 5 or 6 pseudo-divine treasures were the most common. Level 7 or 8 pseudo-divine treasures were the most common. Level 7 or 8 fake sage treasures are still quite rare." Taoist Divine Turtle said with a smile. That's right. Taoist Bei Shi also smiled. When Luo Fan heard this, he could not help but laugh. He knew that he had taken it for granted. However, when he thought about it, it made sense. If they were really level 8 pseudo-saint treasures, why would Taoist Bei Shi and the others bring up the matter of level 9 pseudo-saint treasures in the treasure discussion conference? Since it was a treasure discussion, it wasn't like the auction house. It was just a naked transaction. After the cultivator with unknown strength finished introducing his pagoda-shaped magic treasure, some cultivators first exclaimed in admiration that this was the magical use of magic treasures. Then, they raised some difficult problems and asked the cultivator how to solve the problems encountered by the magic treasure. If that cultivator was able to solve most problems, he would not be able to do so. But there were also some problems that were difficult to solve. He didn't hide it and directly said that he couldn't solve them. So he asked everyone present for advice. After a series of questions and answers, a cultivator went onto the platform and took out a mirror-like magic treasure. He introduced it next to the pagoda and wanted to exchange it for the level 8 pseudo-sage treasure with the first cultivator. So it's him. I didn't expect him to be tempted too. But this suppressive magic treasure is indeed quite useful. Taoist Shingue couldn't help but be surprised when he saw the cultivator who went up later. "Oh, do you know him, Taoist Shingue?" Luo Fan asked in surprise. This is Taoist Medicinal Fire, a level 7 fake sage expert. Before he broke through, I had some dealings with him for a while. Taoist Shingue explained. Judging from his expression, he was obviously a little disappointed. This made Luo Fan instantly realize that the relationship between him and Taoist Medicinal Fire was not that simple. At least, in the previous day, many people came to greet him, and Taoist Shingue also went to greet many people, but Taoist Medicinal Fire was not among them. Whether it was those who came to greet him or those he went to greet, there was no one. If there was no deeper secret behind this, it would be inexcusable. But of course, this had nothing to do with Luo Fan. Since Taoist Shen Gui didn't say, he naturally didn't ask. Therefore, although he had some thoughts in his mind, he just smiled and nodded as if he didn't. The mirror-like magic treasure in Taoist medicinal fire's hand was a level 8 fake sage treasure, and its surface rippled with watery light. It was as if it had a world made entirely of water. According to Taoist medicine Hua, he had inadvertently obtained this magic treasure. But because it didn't match his own path of cultivation, it was like casting pearls before swine. It had been lying there for tens of thousands of years, rotting. This time, he took it out to exchange for the tower-like magic treasure, and at the same time, to obtain the sacrificial method of the tower. The owner of the tower-shaped magic treasure seemed to be quite interested in the mirror-like magic treasure. After everyone's comments and his own investigation, the owner of the tower-shaped magic treasure seemed to be quite interested in the mirror-like magic treasure. After the comments of the crowd and his own investigation, he finally agreed to the exchange. The two each took the other's magic treasure, left the platform, and returned to their original positions. Half a day had passed since they had started their trade. Although the whole transaction had nothing to do with Luo Fan, he didn't feel bored at all. Instead, he found it quite interesting to watch the comments of the many cultivators on the two magic treasures. The various problems that existed in the two magical treasures that originally looked so wonderful, as well as the various solutions to these problems, all made Luo Fan feel that he had gained a lot. This was the first time he had participated in something like this, and any argument put forward by any cultivator opened up a whole new world before his eyes, allowing him to look at something familiar from a direction that he had never thought of before. Even after the transaction was completed, he still felt like he hadn't had enough. Thank you for bringing me to this treasure meet, fellow Taoist. If I hadn't come, I'm afraid I would have missed a good opportunity. Luo Fan sighed and said to Taoist Shen Gui and Taoist Bei Shi. Naturally, the two of them were humble. After the transaction was completed, another transaction didn't immediately begin, which was different from the situation in the auction house. The cultivators in the hall were still talking after the transaction. After the transaction, they continued to chat, as if they were discussing who had suffered a loss in the previous transaction and what they had comprehended from it just now. After waiting for a long time, another cultivator came forward and took out his treasure. Sure enough, compared to the level 8 magic treasure that appeared before, the magic treasure that appeared this time was only a level 5 magic treasure, which was completely different from Luo Fan's original guess. That's normal. Luo Fan sighed and immersed himself in this treasure meet. Compared to the previous level, 8 pseudo-saint treasure, the discussion this time was even more lively. The reason was very simple. Although the level 8 pseudo-holy treasure was mysterious, not everyone was qualified to participate in the discussion. If one did not have a sufficient understanding of the level 8 pseudo-holy treasure, and if one's realm was not high enough to sense the level 8 pseudo-holy treasure, participating in the discussion would only be embarrassing oneself. However, this level 5 pseudo-sage treasure was different. Even a level 2 or level 3 pseudo-sage cultivator could express some opinions about it and raise some valid doubts. Obviously, there were more cultivators of this level among all the cultivators present. This time, the level 5 pseudo-divine treasure was not exchanged. After a few days of discussion, the cultivator returned to his platform with his level 5 magic treasure. However, although he did not exchange it, the cultivator was not depressed or discouraged at all. Instead, he was quite happy, as if he had gained a lot. That was how it was. When they took out their magic treasures, they did not necessarily have to abandon that magic treasure. Instead, they had the thought that it was good to exchange it, but it was not a bad thing to not exchange it. More importantly, they wanted to brainstorm and provide some ideas for their next step in refining magic treasures, or provide some inspiration for their next step in cultivation. Just like that, the treasure discussion continued like a raging fire. Every few days, a cultivator would go up with his treasure. Most of them were magic treasures, But there were also some oddly shaped things, such as strange fragments of magic treasures, or things that had developed for a long time, developed in a very special civilized world, or simply some kind of magical power. Among these many treasures, the ones that were traded successfully and the ones that failed were traded evenly. There was no difference in the number of successful trades, nor was there a difference in the number of unsuccessful trades. Luo Fan was very interested in such a treasure meet. He listened to the many cultivators express their different opinions on the same treasure from different perspectives. He watched them argue again and again. He listened to their wisdom and knowledge colliding, bursting out brilliant colors. He felt that his horizons had been broadened. He felt that he had a deeper understanding of the cultivation system of the demon realm. Just like that, half a year passed. One day, Luo Fan's heart suddenly stirred. He felt some kind of strange connection with him through some kind of extremely mysterious mechanism. An inexplicable message was transmitted to his heart through this connection. This is Hu Yun. His heart skipped a beat as he suddenly understood what this connection was all about. After analyzing the aura, his expression changed. He stood up and said to Taoist Bei, "Sure, fellow cultivator, something happened to a friend of mine. I have to leave first." "Something happened to your friend? If that's the case, I'll go with you. Perhaps I can be of some help." Taoist Beisher said, "No need. I can deal with this. If there are too many people, it will be troublesome." Luo Fan shook his head and said, Chapter 1328. Almost no one would leave before the end of the Treasure Discussion Conference. This was not because the Treasure Discussion Conference did not allow people to leave once it was held, but because the cultivators who participated in the Treasure Discussion Conference all cherished this Treasure Discussion Conference. After all, it was a great opportunity to communicate with so many powerful people and see the many mysterious and precious treasures of the heavens. It was not so easy to encounter such an opportunity. Therefore, although the Qin Palace closed its doors after the Treasure Discussion Conference began, this only meant that the Treasure Discussion Conference had begun and those who had not entered could no longer enter. It did not completely prohibit the cultivators who participated in the Treasure Discussion Conference from leaving. When Luo Fan came to the door directly opened. He didn't even need to do anything. As the door opened, many cultivators in the Qin Palace couldn't help but look over. They wanted to see what the cultivator who had left the Treasure Discussion Conference early looked like, something that hadn't appeared for countless years. This kind of thing was really too strange. Even though these cultivators were not ordinary cultivators, they were still extremely curious and had a strong desire to understand. However, they naturally couldn't see anything. After all, the suppressive power in the Qin Palace was too strong. Anyone here looked like an ordinary person. When they looked at him, Luo Fan looked the same as them. He also looked like an ordinary person. How could they see anything deeper? Luo Fan didn't care about the attention he was suddenly receiving. The platform in the Qin Palace was completely open. Everyone could see each and every one of them at a glance. And for these cultivators, even if they appeared to be ordinary people, their nature of cultivation would not change. Anyone who looked at them would naturally have a photographic memory. They would remember everyone's appearance, figure, and many other characteristics. As a result, in the period before, Luo Fan's appearance, figure, and so on were naturally clearly remembered by all the cultivators present. This time, when they looked over again, but it wouldn't affect him too much. He already knew what he should know. What he shouldn't know, he wouldn't be able to obtain more. He didn't pause, didn't hesitate, and stepped out of the Qin Palace's door. The moment he stepped out of the door of the Qin Palace closed behind him, just like in the past few months. Qin Palace was directly isolated from the outside world. After leaving the Qin Palace, Luo Fan took a step forward, and his figure instantly crossed hundreds of millions of miles. They arrived at a remote place. Here, the surroundings were empty, and Qinggong Island was nowhere to be seen. After he arrived, the space around his body suddenly fluctuated intensely. This kind of fluctuation was extremely mysterious. It looked like an elastic rubber cloth was suddenly being rolled by something huge, as if something was trying to squeeze out from it. With a thought, Luo Fan raised his hand. In an instant, the area within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was enveloped by a strange world. The world itself did not appear very grand or vast. It did not even show any special features. It looked like there was an extra layer of colorless and transparent membrane in this area. However, it was precisely such a world that was completely isolated from the outside world. As a result, nothing that happened inside could be detected by the outside world. Even with the naked eye, it was difficult to see what Luo Fan was doing inside from the outside. Being enveloped by this world, anyone who looked in from the outside would only see an empty sea. They would not be able to see Luo Fan above the sea, nor would they be able to see the changes that were about to happen. Suddenly, with a soft poof, a golden world broke through the void and appeared in front of Luo Fan. Although there was no aura in this golden world, Luo Fan knew that this was clearly a world that he had previously opened up. It was a world that was specially used to accommodate the primeval world. However, compared to when he had first opened up this world had already undergone some wonderful changes, which was why it looked like this. With a thought, Luo Fan grasped this world and sensed it slightly before sighing. In this golden world, there was indeed a world that made him feel very helpless. It was the world that he had previously refused to accept Hu Yun's gift. The primeval world, a chance to become a saint, a key to open the saint realm. After so many twists and turns, I didn't expect it to fall into my hands in the end. Luo Fan sighed. With a slight movement of his heart, countless changes appeared in the entire demon world. They instantly condensed and completely changed this golden world. In an instant, the original appearance of the world turned into a painting. It was a painting of a very strange mountain and river. It seems that there are some things that I really have to do. After rolling up this painting and putting it away in his world in the sleeve, Luo Fan thought to himself. With a light step, his figure passed through layers of time and space, heading towards a place that he could sense inexplicably. Previously, when he was participating in the treasure discussion in the Chun Palace and was listening with great interest, he received a message from Hu Yun. Along with that message, that primeval world also came. That primeval world, under Hu Yun's means, turned into an existence that seemed illusory yet real, and seemed to exist yet not exist. Along with that message, it directly stuffed itself into him. As long as he received that message, that world would definitely appear directly in front of him, regardless of whether he was willing or not. It was precisely because of Hu Yun's forceful method that he had no choice but to give up on the treasure discussion and directly leave the Chun Palace Island. He came to this unfamiliar and secretive place to receive that world. Fortunately, although Hu Yun had forcefully transmitted that world to give him some time to react, she did not directly synchronize that world with the message. This allowed him to barely suppress the appearance of that world and wait until he felt that the location was suitable. Only then did it truly reveal its true form. If not for this, even if Luo Fan had enveloped that world with his own world, he could not truly be sure that no other cultivators would be able to see what exactly that world was. This was even more so when there was a level 9 false saint like Hizun present. As for why Hu Yun had used such a forceful method to transmit this world's message over, the reason was obviously quite simple. The fact that she possessed this primeval world had been discovered by others, and the person who had discovered this primeval world was someone that she could not resist. She was also unwilling to submit, so she could only fight to the bitter end. She might as well give this world to Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan was rather displeased. This primeval world was of little use to him and brought him great trouble. He did not want this primeval world at all in the first place, and now that he was forced to accept it, it would be strange if he was in a good mood. He wanted to ignore Hu Yun's death. He wanted to directly abandon this primeval world or directly swallow it. However, he could not get past his own hurdle. Helpless, he could only follow the direction of that message and head towards the source of that message. Of course, there was a path for the transmission of information. Although this path was extremely obscure, it was extremely abstract, but it was still related to karma. With Luo Fan's level of application of the law of karma, it was a little troublesome to find such a path, but it was still doable. As he walked and calculated with the help of the law of karma, Luo Fan soon found Hu Yun's location. After passing through an unknown distance of billions of kilometers, he came to a strange sea. The shape of the seawater in this sea was very strange. Although it was seawater, it was gelatinous like jelly. It could actually support everything that was born in it like land, and it could support everything that was born in it, cultivate in it, and even work on it. The entire sea area was extremely vast, and it was more than 10 times larger than the island he had stayed on when he first entered the demon realm. On this sea area, there were all kinds of strange plants. The distribution of these plants was similar to the distribution of various plants on land. There were even all kinds of terrains. The ups and downs of the jelly-like seawater formed many mountain ranges, various basins, and plains. In addition, there were all kinds of creatures living in this sea area. Looking at their living conditions, there was not much difference from the way they lived on land. In fact, it could even be said to be exactly the same. Above this sea, Luo Fan also sensed the auras of countless ordinary mortals and cultivators. They formed countries and formed all kinds of strange civilizations. They fought and fought, displaying all kinds of hot-bloodedness, all kinds of courage, and all kinds of gratitude and grudges. What a great sea area! Seeing such a sea area, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim. He suddenly thought of staying in this sea area for a period of time and enjoying the feeling of living in such an alternative terrain. However, this was naturally not a choice he could make now. He had come here because he could sense that Hu Yun was in danger here. At the very least, this was where Hu Yun had been when she sent the message. Under such circumstances, he could only see how Hu Yun was, whether she was dead or not, and whether she could be saved. Only after resolving this matter could he consider other problems. With a move of his heart, Luo Fan's perception instantly encompassed the entire area within an unknown radius of hundreds of millions of miles into his perception. Through such perception, he was looking for Hu Yun's aura. Found it. With a flash of inspiration, Luo Fan frowned slightly and took a step forward. His figure had already entered the bottom of the sea. Although the seawater in this sea area was gelatinous and could support the survival of living beings on it like land, it was still seawater after all. It had characteristics of seawater, and there were still countless creatures living under it. It could even be said to be a different world. The void of the universe could not stop Luo Fan, and even the barrier in the state of chaos could not stop him from entering and exiting, let alone this special, gelatinous seawater. After entering, Luo Fan felt that there was no difference from being in a normal space. In an instant, he arrived at the bottom of the gelatinous sea area. There was a continuous stretch of crystal buildings here, which looked like the legendary Crystal Palace of the Dragon King. At this moment, there was no sign of life in this building complex, but there were all kinds of inexplicable auras, which showed that there were many creatures here not long ago. And Hu Yun's aura was in this location. After arriving here, Luo Fan floated above the building complex and looked at the empty building complex below with an annoyed look on his face. He did not come here to play some detective game. With a thought, he grabbed. The auras in this building complex were instantly gathered in front of him. With a wave of his hand, the countless auras separated and evolved into a complex but complete scene. In this scene, it was the appearance of this building complex. And those auras, they turned into creatures in this building complex. There were hundreds of millions of them, and among them, most of them had already achieved the immortal realm. Only a very small number of them had not achieved the immortal realm. And among these people, the strongest were 2 level 3 pseudo-sacred stage cultivators. One of them was Hu Yun, and the other was an extremely handsome young man. Apart from these 2 level 3 pseudo-sacred stage cultivators, the strongest was only a half-step pseudo-sacred stage cultivator. And there were 2 half-step pseudo-sacred stage cultivators. The creatures formed by the auras performed their respective duties in this building complex. So the building complex was not as dead as it was now. Instead, it was full of vitality and was extraordinarily lively. And at this moment, the creatures formed by Hu Yun's aura were in the same hall as the handsome young man and the remaining half-step pseudo-sacred stage cultivators. Although they were only formed by auras, Luo fans' means were extremely mysterious. Even so, they were like real living creatures. Not only did they have an image, but they also had voices. Very soon, they replayed everything that happened here in front of Luo Fan. It seemed like time had been reversed and everything had happened again. I see. Why are you still so naive? To actually tell others about this kind of thing. Luo Fan sighed. After seeing the development of the whole thing, he also understood what had happened. That man seemed to be a good friend of Hu Yun. Although they were not cultivation companions, they were not much different from true cultivation companions. The two half-step pseudo-sacred stage cultivators beside the man were the disciples that the man valued the most. This time, Hu Yun went to Chunggong Island to exchange for those embryonic magic treasures for the sake of the man's disciples. She wanted them to improve as soon as possible so that they could set foot on the 9 steps below the sage stage and become a pseudo-sacred stage cultivator. From the price she had paid for those embryonic magic treasures, one could see Hu Yun's attitude towards the man. After distributing the 2 embryonic magic treasures, Hu Yun told the man about her harvest from Chunggong Island. As they talked, she started to talk about Luo Fan. She told him about the strange world that she had obtained in the past, which was actually a primitive world that could give one a chance to become a sage. After hearing this, the man was stunned and expressed his disbelief. He said that Hu Yun was overthinking and had been fooled. Hu Yun also smiled and did not say much. She only said that she was going to move her cave abode away and would not be able to see that man for a period of time. She would wait for her to truly settle down before telling him. At this moment, the man immediately became hostile and unleashed a boundless magic skill that engulfed Hu Yun and shattered her body. Fortunately, Hu Yun had already broken through and become a pseudo-sacred stage cultivator. This was the moment when her life force was at its strongest. She quickly reacted and reformed her body before engaging in an extremely intense battle with the man. During the battle, Hu Yun was still in disbelief and asked the man why he wanted to kill her. Why? Is there a need to ask? There is only one chance to become a sage. That was the man's answer at that time. This answer made Hu Yun feel like she had been struck by lightning. She felt like her worldview had been completely overturned. She almost went crazy at that moment. She wanted to destroy everything without any hesitation. However, it was a pity that the man had become a rank 3 pseudo-saint a long time before her. The moment Hu Yun unleashed her might, he had completely broken through Hu Yun's technique. In the end, he only managed to kill the disciples of his sect and the many living beings here before he managed to subdue Hu Yun. At the last moment, Hu Yun knew that something was wrong. In the end, she sent the primordial world along with a message to Luo Fan, who was far away on Chunggong Island. At that moment, the man seemed to have sensed something. In a rage, he sealed Hu Yun into his body and left by traveling through the void, completely disregarding his original foundation. When a man finally disappeared, the aura collapsed and completely dissipated, eventually turning into nothingness. As for why this building complex was not damaged, it was not only because Hu Yun's subconscious had left some leeway, but it was also because the building complex itself had the ability to repair itself. Although Luo Fan came very quickly, the building complex itself did not suffer much damage, so it was completely repaired. After sighing, Luo Fan began to calculate where the man had gone. Chapter 1329. Since he had already caught a trace of the aura, it was naturally extremely easy for Luo Fan to find the level 3 pseudo-sage. With a thought, he made a slight calculation. As karma flowed, he had already sensed the space-time where the level 3 pseudo-sage was. For the current Luo Fan, the barrier of space-time and the division of worlds could no longer affect him. He casually patted the space in front of him. In an instant, the 4 basic existences, time, space, matter, and energy, suddenly produced a strong and unparalleled distortion. This distortion finally broke the shackles of the demon realm and directly constructed a space-time passage that led to a strange world outside the demon realm. As the space-time passage appeared, the aura of the male level, 3 pseudo-sage, suddenly became 100 times stronger. It was obvious that the level 3 pseudo-sage was at the end of the space-time passage. For you, at this moment, an awe-inspiring shout came from the space-time passage and exploded around Luo Fan's body. In an instant, the surrounding space-time distorted indescribably, revealing countless strange lights and shadows. "Come out," Luo Fan said faintly. Although his voice sounded extremely flat, it contained infinite divine might. In an instant, the distortion of space-time that was caused by that stern shout was completely smoothed out. The space-time around his body changed to a completely normal appearance. There are no longer any signs of the distortion from before. Then, Luo Fan's voice directly penetrated the space-time passage and transmitted to a strange world behind the space-time passage. It was a world behind the space-time passage. It was a vast and boundless ocean world. The entire world was boundless, but it was filled with endless seawater. There was no land at all, not even the bottom of the sea. There were no terrestrial creatures either. Although there were countless living creatures, they were all marine creatures of all kinds. They were all strange and mysterious. In contrast, the seawater in this world was like the boundless void in the starry sky of the universe. Both served the same purpose and produced the same effect in this world. In such a world, the deep-sea fishes seemed to have evolved to an extremely high level. Many creatures were born with intelligence and formed a strange underwater civilization, so that the world did not seem barren. It was lonely. However, at this very moment, an existence that had never appeared since the birth of this world was born. The void. A giant hand formed from the void appeared out of nowhere and grabbed towards a certain location in the world. That was where the illusory hand had grabbed. It was the center of this world. There was a group of crystal-clear palaces that looked similar to the palaces under Luo Fan's feet. However, they were more gorgeous and magnificent. It also contained a sense of vastness that the palaces in the demon realm did not have. Such a group of palaces, under the illusory hand, was completely destroyed. It began to tremble violently. Moreover, it was not just this vast palace complex. Even the entire world seemed to be shaking violently under the illusory hand, causing all the living beings in this world to involuntarily fall into an indescribable panic. They felt as if some sort of shocking change was about to occur. Damn it! A furious roar came from the palace complex. Then a glittering and translucent hand charged out from somewhere in the palace complex. When it first appeared, the hand was only a few hundred meters in size, but when it charged into the air, it had already grown 10,000 times in size, reaching the same size as the invisible hand. Suddenly, it collided with the invisible hand. In an instant, a terrifying shockwave began to spread from the point of contact, directly flattening more than half of the world. It even turned the seawater in the range of the shockwave into nothingness, and a large void that filled more than half of the world appeared. However, the seawater that filled the entire world was not the result of some existence moving a huge amount of seawater to fill the world. Instead, it was born from the laws of the world itself. It was a phenomenon that appeared based on the great Tao of the world and the laws of the world. Therefore, although the void that filled more than half of the world was blasted out, seawater quickly seeped out of the void and began to quickly make up for the lack of seawater. It was simply the same as when space was destroyed and the world naturally came out to make up for the void. Since the shockwave had such terrifying consequences, it was easy to imagine the changes that occurred to the two sides after the collision. In an instant, the hand that rushed out of the palace complex trembled slightly, and countless cracks appeared on it. These cracks grew larger and larger, and in the end, the hand was completely torn apart, turning into countless fragments. On the other hand, the giant hand that was born out of nothingness trembled violently when it received this impact. Countless fine lines suddenly flashed across the giant hand of nothingness. These lines were not the same as the cracks. The cracks appeared when something was missing, but these lines appeared when something was present. These countless tiny and complicated lines covered the entire palm. It was as if this was the true essence of this illusory palm. It was as if these lines had outlined this palm, and the illusory appearance of the palm from before was merely an illusion. If the structure of these lines was subtly changed, three strange and incomparably complicated words would appear. Come out. Obviously, this big hand of nothingness was transformed from the three characters that Luo Fan had casually said. After the lines revealed their essence, the power of the illusory hand suddenly increased by many times. Not only did it shatter the hand that was blocking it, but it also didn't let the fragments go. It continued to rush over, pressing down on the fragments like countless meteors. It crazily swept toward the group of palaces below, instantly shattering countless palaces, revealing a figure hidden in the group of palaces. It was the figure of a male level 3 false sage, the one who had plotted against Huyun. At this time, this person's face was full of horror. Under the palm, formed by Luo Fan's three words, he trembled like an ant. He suddenly roared, and his body suddenly shrank inwards. With a puff, before the big hand formed by Luo Fan's three characters arrived, it had already disappeared without a trace, leaving only a gradually dissipating space-time tunnel phantom at that position. He actually has a backer. Luo Fan could not help but frown when he sensed this change. The shadow of the space-time tunnel was not fake, but it was not a real space-time tunnel either. It was actually a temporary space-time tunnel opened by an extremely powerful false sage that led to a certain space-time, a certain world. Such a space-time tunnel was very hidden, and it could only accommodate certain existences. Once someone passed through it, it would immediately disappear completely, erasing all traces, making it impossible for people to follow through this tunnel. Obviously, it was an extremely precious treasure for escaping. Those who could refine the shadow of the space-time tunnel were all extremely powerful false sages. Even a level 6 false sage might not have the ability to refine it, let alone a level 3 false sage. However, the male level 3 false sage could actually open such a shadow of the space-time tunnel. Of course, it could not be his own strength. This meant that there was at least a 6-tier pseudo-sage or above cultivator behind him. Only in this way could he display such a shadow of the space-time tunnel and escape the moment when Luo Fan's big hand was about to grab him. Let me see where it is. With a thought from Luo Fan, the big hand formed by the three characters suddenly collapsed and turned into a strange light. It instantly froze the space-time and isolated some kind of strange erasure force, causing the shadow of the space-time tunnel that was quickly dissipating to suddenly stop dissipating. It was as if a real space-time tunnel had appeared in that position. At this moment, a cold snort came from the space-time tunnel. This cold snort was not the voice of the male level 3 false sage, but the voice of another existence. That existence was a woman. Her voice reverberated hundreds and thousands of times, and it was extremely charming. However, there was also an unparalleled might contained within it. After it was transmitted, it naturally evolved and turned into a terrifying destructive force. It instantly broke through the strange light formed by the three characters of Luo Fan, causing the space-time to return to normal. It also erased all traces of the existence of the space-time tunnel, leaving no trace of aura remaining. It was impossible to find where the space-time tunnel was connected to and what it looked like. A level 7 false sage. Luo Fan frowned. Just from his cold snort, he could tell that the owner of the cold snort had at least surpassed the 6th step below the sage. In other words, it was at least a level 6 false sage and had reached the level of a level 7 false sage. Only such an existence could so easily break through the strange power formed by the three characters of Luo Fan and completely erase the shadow of the space-time tunnel before Luo Fan could react. She really is a good backer. Luo Fan sighed and could not help but smile bitterly. I didn't expect to find such big trouble. Originally, he thought that he had gotten a great deal from the deal with Yun. Not only did he obtain tens of thousands of strange worlds, which could deepen his understanding of the world, but he also obtained the precious method of refining a magic treasure embryo. He could refine a magic treasure embryo at will to exchange for many things he needed. However, he did not expect that the price was waiting for him. The deal with Yun would eventually cause him to go against a level 7 false sage, which made him feel a little helpless. There were indeed no free benefits in this world. However, although he was a little depressed, Luo Fan did not have the slightest intention of giving up. Now that the situation was like this, even if he was willing to let go, there was no way to reverse the situation. First of all, Yun was now in the hands of the level 3 false sage, and after the level 3 false sage entered the protection range of the level 7 false sage, Yun's existence naturally could not be hidden from the level 7 false sage. Yun's existence could not be hidden, which was the reason for the conflict between the two of them. Naturally, there was no way to hide it. In other words, they only needed to make a few turns. That level 7 pseudo-sage would naturally place his attention on him and want to deal with him to snatch the primordial world from him. The opportunity to become a sage was a wonderful opportunity that any cultivator who wanted to reach the sage realm could not give up. As a level 7 false sage, Luo Fan did not need to think to know how much he was willing to pay for this. It could be said that he and the level 7 false sage were already almost irreconcilable. If the level 7 false sage wanted to obtain the primeval world, he would not let anyone who knew about the primeval world escape. He would kill everyone who knew about it, whether it was Yun, the male level 3 false sage, or even Luo Fan. With a sigh, Luo Fan's mind slowly dispersed and gradually merged with the great Tao of the demon realm. The existence of a level 7 false sage was still a little stronger for the current Luo Fan. Although he had a way to deal with such an existence, it required the help of a lot of external objects. He also needed to create various conditions to be able to do it. Therefore, if he wanted to deal with a level 7 false sage, he still needed to make a long-term plan. After his mind merged with the great Tao of the demon realm, he felt the pulse of the entire world and an indescribable vastness enveloping him, making him feel as if his entire mind was about to melt into the great Tao. It was as if he was about to be completely assimilated by the great Tao. With a slight thought, his mind condensed and infinite brilliance radiated. This feeling of being assimilated was instantly washed away. As long as a cultivator reached the Tao Master Realm, which was also the peak Sage-to-Be realm, the great Tao that one condensed was already out of the control of the great Tao. As long as one reached this step, the mind of a cultivator would have the ability to merge with the great Tao without being assimilated by it. As long as one reached this step, the mind of a cultivator would have the ability to merge with the great Tao and not be assimilated by it. And now that Luo Fan was already a level 3 false sage, this ability would naturally be stronger and not weaker. After this change, Luo Fan used the senses of the great Tao and the karma connection to carefully deduce Yun's location. It was no longer difficult for the current Luo Fan to deduce the existence of someone or something based on the karma connection. Generally speaking, he only needed to think about it, and he could do it. However, it was not without any restrictions. If the thing he wanted to deduce was covered up by an existence that was stronger than him, it would be quite difficult for him to deduce it. Not only would it take a long time, but it was also possible that he would get nothing in the end. What Luo Fan wanted to deduce now was that the location of Yun was obviously covered up by the level 7 false sage, who was stronger than him. With Luo Fan's current means, if he wanted to deduce it by force, it would take him a few days, at most a few months, to break through the cover-up. However, it was obvious that they didn't have enough time now. Even if they succeeded, Yun might have already been killed by the 7-level pseudo-sage by then. What was the point of deducing then? Because of this, Luo Fan could only deduce with the help of the power of the great Tao of the demon realm. The great Tao of the demon realm was great and vast. and its power was endless. It was also blessed by the 54 sages of the demon realm. One could imagine how magical and powerful it was. Borrowing its power to deduce the location of certain existences, there were almost no existences that could hide from it. This was also a new method that Luo Fan had recently obtained through comprehending the primordial world. In the past, before he comprehended and studied the primordial world, he could only integrate his mind into the great Tao at most to sense the many mysteries of the great Tao contained in it and improve his cultivation realm. It was impossible to use the power of the great Tao to perform remarkable skills. However, after studying and comprehending the primordial world for a period of time, he finally understood the essence of using the power of the great Tao. He finally obtained the ability to use the power of the great Tao to perform remarkable skills. Of course, the great Tao was suppressed by the 54 sages now, so the power that he could borrow was extremely weak. It was naturally not a problem to use it to strengthen his deduction ability and break through the cover of a certain powerful existence. However, if he wanted to use this power to kill a certain existence in the demon realm, even if it was just an ordinary person, it would be impossible. After using the power of the great Tao to deduce, Luo Fan instantly obtained a result. After obtaining this result, he hurriedly separated his mind from the great Tao. When his mind returned to his body, he finally heaved a sigh of relief. This kind of thing can't be done often. He sighed and smiled bitterly. It was his first time using the power of the great Tao of the demon realm to deduce. Previously, he had at most used the great Tao of the primordial world to experiment. This time, after truly borrowing the great Tao of the demon realm, he realized that compared to the primordial world, borrowing the great Tao of the demon realm was like walking on a tightrope. The 54 sages had almost completely suppressed and mastered all the great Tao. There were only some gaps left in the corners of the great Tao that could be used freely. These tiny gaps were powerful enough to allow any cultivator to do countless things, but because they were extremely small, they could easily cross the line if they weren't careful. In other words, when using these remaining gaps, one could accidentally touch the area where the 54 sages' great Tao were connected and fused, which was also the area where they suppressed and controlled the great Tao. Chapter 1330. Although he was using the power of the great Tao, like walking on a tightrope, he still found the place he was looking for in the end. Just a level, 7 pseudo-sacred. Let me see what you've got. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan lifted his hand and tore open the void. A space-time tunnel instantly formed in front of him. As the space-time tunnel took shape, a faint aura seeped out from it. This aura seemed somewhat familiar, yet also extremely strange. It was extremely unique. Luo Fan sensed it and knew that he had found the right place. The male level, 3 pseudo-sacred, and the level, 7 pseudo-sacred were behind the space-time tunnel. With a thought, Luo Fan stepped into the space-time tunnel. After passing through the space-time tunnel, he came to a strange world. This world was boundless, but it was filled with an indescribable fragrance. The entire world was filled with fresh flowers and green grass. There were even petals floating in the void. It looked like a world of fresh flowers. In this world, there were also countless living beings. Among them, the ones with the highest intelligence and civilization were thumb-sized humanoid creatures with transparent wings on their backs. They were like fairies in legends. This kind of living being could be found all over the world. They wandered among the flowers and collected nectar. They were diligent, happy, and laughed, filling this vast world with joy. How interesting! Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim as he looked at this world. This world looked beautiful. In fact, in order to create this world, one had to fix it into its current form. However, it required endless effort. It wasn't as simple as creating a world and setting the appearance of that world. Instead, countless laws and laws needed to be adjusted, and minute adjustments needed to be made to the great Tao. Only then could the world appear like this. Therefore, the current state of this world showed how much effort the owner of this world had spent on this world. In this world, the tiny sprites weren't all weak. Among them, There were also some fairies whose tiny bodies contained superhuman energy. In fact, Luo Fan even sensed that a few of the fairies were comparable to pseudo-sacred existences. They were like true kings, occupying several directions in this world, dividing the entire world into several parts, each suppressing everything within their range. You actually dare to chase after me. You're courting death. Suddenly, a voice entered Luo Fan's ears. This coquettish voice was the same one that Luo Fan had heard before. That was the voice of a level 7 pseudo-sage. Obviously, the moment Luo Fan stepped into this world, the 7th grade fall saint had already discovered his existence. Under this voice, Luo Fan suddenly felt an extremely powerful binding force on his body. This binding force was so strong that it even distorted the void. Even Luo Fan felt like he couldn't move at this moment. Subsequently, a large white hand appeared out of thin air in front of him, and it stretched out 2 fingers as it smashed towards him. Looking at the 2 fingers, Luo Fan could not help but laugh. He hadn't experienced the feeling of being crushed by 2 fingers for a very, very long time. Now that he was experiencing it again, he felt an indescribable strange feeling. With a slight thought, the space-time around his body fluctuated, and the nomological law layer instantly changed. The binding force was suddenly removed, and he instantly felt relaxed. After getting rid of the binding force, he let out a loud roar. The roar left his body and instantly turned into a large hand, slapping towards the white hand. With a loud crack, the large hand formed by Luo Fan's shout directly collided with the large white hand. In an instant, space-time shattered, and a gray smoke began to spread in all directions from the point of contact between the two. In the process of spreading, the surrounding space-time became more and more distorted, and the damage became more and more intense. As a result, the smoke did not become thinner as it spread, but became thicker and thicker as it was supplemented by the surrounding space-time being destroyed. This smoke seemed ordinary, but it had terrifying destructive power. Luo Fan was currently hundreds of kilometers above the ground in the sky. Such a distance might be very long for mortals, but for a battle between ordinary cultivators, it was nothing, let alone an existence at Luo Fan's level at this moment. In an instant, the smoke traversed hundreds of kilometers and swept across the ground. With this sweep, a thick layer of the ground was scraped off. Everything within a radius of an unknown number of kilometers was turned into nothingness. Whether it was the various flowers and plants that grew or the many little spirits that lived in them, they all turned into nothingness. Damn it! A cold, angry curse was heard. With this angry curse, the result of the collision between Luo Fan's shout and the large white hand was also revealed. The large white hand was directly smashed into pieces, and the large hand formed by Luo Fan's shout also shrunk by more than half because of the collision. Countless lines appeared on its surface, revealing the true appearance of the large hand. This result seemed very incredible, but it was actually very normal. The owner of the large white hand treated Luo Fan as an ordinary level 3 pseudo-saint, so the method she used was naturally targeted at an ordinary level 3 pseudo-saint. This kind of attack was really like a tickle to Luo Fan. How could it pose any threat to him? It was really not surprising that it was smashed into pieces by such a shout. Naturally, Luo Fan would not let the opponent attack him here. At this moment, he had already found the location of the level 7 pseudo-saint who did not hide her position at all. The level 7 pseudo-saint was not at the center of the world, but the end of the southwest of this world, in a vast and boundless garden of flowers. Beside her was the aura of the level 3 pseudo-saint. She was there. With a thought, Luo Fan lifted his foot and stepped forward lightly. In the blink of an eye, he had already crossed hundreds of millions of kilometers, passed through almost half of the world, and arrived directly above the garden of flowers. You actually didn't run away, and instead took the initiative to come to me? A cold snort came into Luo Fan's ears. Then, a silver hairpin appeared out of thin air and flew towards Luo Fan. This silver hairpin looked ordinary, but in the process of flying towards him, It gave Luo Fan an extremely dangerous feeling, as if this silver hairpin could threaten his life. Beneath the silver hairpin, time, space, matter, and energy seemed to become illusory. They constantly vibrated around the hairpin, constantly being born and constantly falling and being destroyed. It seemed as if there was an endless amount of light flickering around the silver hairpin. The appearance of the circles looked gorgeous and dangerous. A level 6 pseudo-saint treasure? Luo Fan looked at this silver hairpin, and his expression became serious. His eyesight and knowledge were not comparable to that of ordinary cultivators, so he could see the level of this silver hairpin at a glance. He could not help but be shocked. A level 6 pseudo-saint treasure was not equivalent to a level 6 pseudo-saint treasure. Generally speaking, if it was just a level 6 pseudo-saint treasure that was refined by skimping on materials, compared to a real level 6 pseudo-saint, it was not enough at all. It was impossible for it to have any ability to resist, and it would definitely be crushed. However, if it was truly refined with sufficient materials, if all the materials were the most suitable level 6 pseudo-saint treasure, its power, because it was not limited by the body, it would be far stronger than a real level 6 pseudo-saint. This was just like the Divine Court Heaven Cauldron that Luo Fan had now. This Divine Court Heaven Cauldron was just a level 9 pseudo-saint treasure that Luo Fan had condensed out of thin air and then catalyzed by the time formation. He did not use any materials at all. Under such circumstances, its power could be said to be incomparable to a real level 9 pseudo-saint. It would definitely be crushed by a real level 9 pseudo-saint. If Luo Fan wanted to fight against a level 9 pseudo-saint with it, he would be courting death. As for a real level 9 pseudo-saint treasure, even if it was just a fragment, it would be enough to make ordinary level 9 pseudo-saint wary. It would definitely be able to crush Luo Fan's Divine Court Heaven Cauldron. And this level 6 pseudo-saint treasure that looked like a silver hairpin in front of him was obviously a real level 6 pseudo-saint treasure. Such a level 6 pseudo-saint treasure had already surpassed the level of a level 6 pseudo-saint. And now, the one who took out this level 6 pseudo-saint treasure was a level 7 pseudo-saint. One could imagine how dangerous it was. In the face of this silver hairpin, even Luo Fan had to treat it seriously. Now, he naturally could not use the previous method of turning his voice into a palm to deal with the enemy. With a thought, he raised his hand and pointed at the silver hairpin. In an instant, countless changes appeared out of thin air and finally condensed on the silver hairpin. In the end, it turned into a ball of light and shadow, forming a strange world that directly swallowed the silver hairpin. What's going on? An exclamation of surprise came into Luo Fan's ears. Then, an extremely charming figure of a woman appeared beside that world, looking at it with a look of disbelief. What world is this? Why did it block my thoughts? She seemed to be a little bewildered. This woman was the backer of the level 3 pseudo-saint male, the level 7 pseudo-saint who had exchanged a few blows with Luo Fan before. I don't know what world it is either. However, this world was specially created for your magic treasure. Its only function is to block your thoughts, so that you can't control this magic treasure, Luo Fan said with a smile. With that, he raised his hand and waved, and that world floated toward him. At this moment, the woman's expression changed. She raised her hand very elegantly, but also very quickly, and grabbed that world with one hand. However, this world didn't seem to exist. Even though she had already placed her hand on it, and even though she had used countless methods, she still couldn't grab that world, and she couldn't stop it from floating toward Luo Fan. Luo Fan stretched out his hand and gently clenched it. That world in his hand turned into a thumb-sized golden pill, lying quietly on his palm. The golden pill seemed to be shining with golden light. Light and shadow flowed within it, as if there was a silver hairpin that was constantly circling and colliding with it. However, no matter how hard it tried, it could not break free from the control of the pill. This is a good magic treasure, I think. It's enough to exchange for the life of a level 3 pseudo-sage. Luo Fan looked at the pill and smiled faintly. The woman's expression changed when she heard that. When the woman heard this, her expression changed, and she said, "It's been a long time since anyone dared to speak to me like this because of 100 blossoms. So it's Taoist Baiwa. Nice to meet you. I'm Luo Fan. I'm very happy to be able to meet Taoist Baiwa today," Luo Fan said with a smile. Baiwa said indifferently, "I don't care if you're called Luo Fan or some fan. Return my magic treasure, then hand over the method to open up this world, and I'll let this matter go." Luo Fan heard this, but he still had a smile on his face. "This deal isn't very fair. Why don't you hand that person over to me, and I'll return this magic treasure to you. Then, we'll have nothing to do with each other. How about that? This is your last chance." Because when Baihua looked at Luo Fan, her coquettish eyes flickered with a cold and proud light. "This isn't the attitude you should have when negotiating a deal." Luo Fan smiled. "Who's negotiating with you?" Baiwa frowned. Frowning on such a beautiful and charming face made her look even more beautiful. At the same time, it also made people feel sorry for her. It made people want to find a way to smooth her frown and do as she said. However, this obviously wouldn't happen to Luo Fan. Asking for a sky-high price and returning it as soon as possible. "Isn't this a deal?" Luo Fan said with a smile. These words, Baihua's expression changed again. A look of disgust appeared in her eyes. She shouted, "Since you've given up your last chance, don't blame me for this." With this shout, she raised her hand and waved it gently. In an instant, a wave of flower fragrance turned corporeal. It was born from the void and gushed toward him out of nowhere. The floral fragrance materialized without any color at all. It was just a strange airflow that couldn't be described with words. With the appearance of the floral fragrance, the surrounding space seemed to be tainted by it. Countless tiny petals appeared out of nowhere and spread in all directions. After the petals were dozens of miles away from the floral fragrance, they gradually dissipated as if they were originally just illusions. It was extremely mysterious. From afar, it looked as if Baihua had raised her hand and slapped it, causing countless petals to shoot out from her hand. After spreading for several dozen kilometers, they disappeared into thin air and turned into nothingness. Luo Fan frowned when he saw the floral fragrance. The floral fragrance had almost reached the limit of the variations of fragrance. It had broken through the limits of the sense of smell. Anyone who saw, or even heard or touched it would be able to understand the fragrance. When Luo Fan saw the floral fragrance, he could feel a strange fragrance penetrating his eyes and pouring into his heart. It was even distorting his will. It made him feel dizzy and drowsy, as if he was about to fall asleep. Sensing the wonderful changes of the floral fragrance, Luo Fan couldn't help but be secretly shocked. With a soft cry, his pheromone charged out and broke through the feelings brought about by the floral fragrance. His mind returned to normal. However, he didn't dare to look at the floral fragrance unprepared. With a thought, a wave of energy covered his eyes, and he looked up at the fragrance of the flowers. Looking at the flower fragrance through the power, everything he saw was completely different from before. Within the floral fragrance, there were countless mysterious tiny worlds arranged together. They collided, crushed, fused, and destroyed each other, ultimately condensing into the floral fragrance. Of course, those worlds weren't ordinary worlds, but worlds constructed from the fragrance. They were all incomparably mysterious worlds that Luo Fan had never seen before. Good move! Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration when he saw this. However, he obviously couldn't observe for too long. When he saw that the floral fragrance was formed from countless worlds, the floral fragrance had already broken through the barriers of space and arrived in front of him. It was about to envelop him. Seeing this, Luo Fan retreated. As he retreated, he set up a world out of thin air in front of him. There was a soft poof. The floral fragrance crashed into the world. In an instant, everything in that world, including the laws, was instantly assimilated by the floral fragrance. They were completely devoured by the floral fragrance. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the entire world was devoured by the floral fragrance. From the looks of it, it would only take a few more moments for the floral fragrance to completely devour the entire world and break through the barriers of the worlds. Seeing this, Luo Fan was shocked. The power of the floral fragrance was several times stronger than he had imagined. He didn't dare to hesitate any longer. With a turn of the world, he was directly sent to the barrier between heaven and earth in the state of primal chaos. Then he directly opened a gap in the world and aimed at the barrier. This instantaneous change was too fast. Luo Fan's movements were too skillful. Therefore, the flowers couldn't react for a moment. The floral fragrance had already broken through the world. Then the barrier between the state of primal chaos and heaven and earth, directly colliding into the state of primal chaos. Although the floral fragrance's power was astonishing, how could it exist in the state of primal chaos? In the blink of an eye, it was completely devoured by the state of primal chaos and turned into nothingness. Chapter 1331. Luo Fan had naturally expected this. When he sent the strange flower fragrance into the primal chaos state, he was already prepared. With a move of his heart, hundreds of millions of subtle changes in the world finally condensed on top of his head, completely counteracting the memory erasure ability and preserving the integrity of his memory. The male level 3 pseudo-sage was not so lucky. Under the effect of the memory erasure ability, he could not resist at all. All his memories of the fragrance were completely erased. In the blink of an eye, he no longer knew that Luo Fan and Baiwa had exchanged another blow. He merely looked at Luo Fan and Baiwa, who were facing each other in midair, a little puzzled. He did not know why their expressions were so strange. As for Baiwa, her performance slightly surprised Luo Fan, because, although she wasn't prepared in advance, she appeared to be more relaxed than Luo Fan, who was already prepared. The essence of the fragrance on her body shook, and in an instant, there was a terrifying, strange power that rushed towards the memory erasure power. In an instant, the erasure power was completely eliminated, allowing her to retain her memories. However, after doing all this, Baiwa seemed to have expended too much energy. Her face became slightly pale, and it took her a while to recover. When she recovered, her gaze towards Luo Fan was filled with indescribable shock. Karma without karma? Baiwa spat out these 4 words with great difficulty. As soon as Luo Fan heard these 4 words, he knew what she was talking about. Karma without karma. This was clearly the second level of the law of karma. There was no need for a reason. The meaning of the result could be directly determined. However, these 4 words were clearly more concise and vivid than the second level of the law of karma. It seemed to have more charm in it, but it made Luo Fan's eyes light up. He decided to use these 4 words to name the second level of the law of karma. Is it very difficult? Is it that unbelievable that I've mastered karma without karma? He smiled. I didn't expect you to have mastered karma without karma. Looks like I've been too rash this time. If you want this person, no problem. I'll give him to you. I just hope that the unpleasantness between you and me will disappear. I'll give you that treasure of mine as an apology. The level 7 pseudo-sage said directly. When Luo Fan heard this, a look of surprise finally appeared on his face. Grasping the Karmalist Karma art was indeed somewhat difficult. It was not something that the average cultivator could grasp. Even so, it shouldn't be this powerful, right? This 100 flowers of karma was clearly looking down on him previously. Why did her attitude take a 180-degree turn after seeing this Karmalist karma? Not only had she completely given up on the level 3 pseudo-sage male that she had been trying to protect, but she had even completely given up on this extremely precious level 6 pseudo-sage treasure. In the end, she only wanted to end the feud between them. Or, to put it another way, to sever karma. Before Luo Fan could reply, 100 blossoms grabbed out, and the male pseudo-sage who had discovered that something was wrong and was about to escape was suddenly frozen in place by an invisible force. Then, it charged straight up and arrived in front of Luo Fan. Without any ability to resist, he could only wait for Luo Fan to make a move. Luo Fan saw this and was too lazy to say anything. He grabbed out, and a beautiful woman slowly came out of the male pseudo-sage's body. This woman was none other than Hu Yun. After Hu Yun came to the outside world, she looked a little dazed. After a while, she finally recognized the situation. Her face was filled with gratitude and sorrow. She sighed faintly, bowed to Luo Fan, and said, "Thank you for saving me, fellow Taoist. Since you've already done that, how can I not save you? How are you going to deal with this person? You can deal with him yourself. Now, he is completely yours." Luo Fan sighed and said. Hearing Luo Fan's words, Hu Yun turned her head to look at the male pseudo-sage. Although this male pseudo-sage's strength and body were sealed by 100 flowers of karma, it did not seal his senses and thoughts. He had seen everything that had happened before. The moment Hu Yun turned around, his eyes couldn't help but reveal panic, anger, and even unspeakable fear and pleading. "I don't know what has blinded my heart for the past hundreds of millions of years. Why can't I see your true face?" Hu Yun sighed. Ignoring the extremely complicated look in the pseudo-sage's eyes, she raised her hand and slapped towards him. In an instant, countless densely packed worlds appeared on the pseudo-sage's body. Then, those worlds were directly annihilated, and the pseudo-sage's body, divine soul, and everything else that was wrapped in those worlds were completely annihilated. In an instant, this pseudo-sage became a historical symbol, and there was no trace of him left in the world. After doing all this, Hu Yun couldn't help but burst into tears, and an indescribable sadness emanated from her body. After a long while, she finally let out a long sigh, bowed to In Bai Hua, apologized for her rudeness, and retreated to the side. As expected, those who can cultivate to the pseudo-sage level are definitely not human. Their minds and wills are definitely not what mortals can compare to. She's clearly heartbroken, but she still decisively annihilated her opponent. Luo Fan thought to himself when he saw Hu Yun's decision. He didn't say anything on the surface. When Hu Yun retreated behind him, he smiled and said to 100 Flowers of Karma, "Can I ask why?" "What do you mean by why?" "There's no karma between us now. You'd better leave my 100 Flowers realm quickly," 100 Flowers of Karma said with a frown. "Why do you have to do this? We're both cultivators. It's rare for us to meet, and it's fate no matter what. Why are you so distant?" Luo Fan said with a smile. "Don't push your luck. Although you've mastered the karmaless karma and will definitely become a pseudo-sage level 9 in the future, you haven't grown up yet. If I go all out, I can still wipe you out," 100 Flowers of Karma said, as if she was suppressing the anger in her heart. Hearing this, Luo Fan understood. He raised his hand and threw a pill to 100 Flowers of Karma. 100 Flowers of Karma's eyes lit up when she saw what the pill was. In the end, she couldn't help but catch the pill. This pill was the pseudo-sage treasure that sealed the pseudo-sage level 6 treasure. It was also the world of the silver hairpin. Although 100 Flowers had previously said that she would give this magic treasure to Luo Fan as an apology and would no longer ask for it back, it did not mean that she really did not care about that magic treasure. This was a level 6 pseudo-saint magic treasure with sufficient craftsmanship. In order to refine this pseudo-sage level 6 treasure, she had spent millions of years and even owed a lot of favors to be able to refine it in such a short period of time. One could imagine how precious it was. Under such circumstances, how could 100 Flowers of Karma keep giving away this treasure? At that moment, she sighed. She raised her hand and pointed at the world. In an instant, a muffled sound was heard and the world was instantly annihilated. The silver hairpin instantly rushed out of the world and appeared beside 100 Flowers of Karma. It circled around her body for a while before merging into her body. It became one with her. "In that case, come down and have a seat in my cave residence." 100 Flowers of Karma sighed and said, after taking back this treasure, the karma naturally wouldn't be settled. Unless she wanted to come back in the future to settle the karma, she could only talk to Luo Fan first. While they were talking, 100 Flowers of Karma raised her hand, and the whole world instantly shook. Then, as if time was flowing back, the damage caused by the battle between her and Luo Fan was completely restored in the blink of an eye. It looked as if the battle had never happened. And below, the buildings also returned to their original appearance. Please, 100 Flowers of Karma had already made a decision. She naturally wouldn't keep a cold face. She smiled and said to Luo Fan. Luo Fan also nodded with a smile and said, please. Then, he and 100 Flowers of Karma descended in front of one of the buildings. This was a garden, that was for sure. In this garden, there were only one or two little spirits wandering among the various flowers. In the garden, there was a pavilion. 100 Flowers of Karma brought Luo Fan to this pavilion. And Hu Yun, of course, also followed behind Luo Fan and came here together. After sitting down, 100 Flowers of Karma said, I wonder what fellow cultivator wants to know. She was determined to satisfy Luo Fan's doubts as soon as possible and settle the karma between her and Luo Fan. It's still the same question. Why did fellow cultivator's attitude change so much when you saw that I had karma of karma? Since 100 Flowers of Karma was so straightforward, Luo Fan naturally didn't hide anything and asked directly. Hearing that, 100 Flowers of Karma sighed softly and said, looks like fellow cultivator's knowledge of cultivation isn't very rich. This wasn't a secret that couldn't be revealed, so Luo Fan didn't deny it either. He smiled and said, that's right. I was hoping for fellow cultivator's guidance. The cultivation world usually divides the realms related to karma into 5 major realms. They are the 5 realms of knowing the cause from seeing the effect, knowing the effect from seeing the cause, obtaining the effect from the cause, karmic karma, and karma karma. Among them, knowing the cause from seeing the effect and knowing the effect from seeing the cause belong to the realm of divination. Generally speaking, even Khanate Grand Luo cultivators can master it. However, when it came to the 3rd realm, starting from the cause and effect stage, one could only achieve it if one was at the pseudo-sage realm. However, this is only in theory. Generally speaking, even level 9 false sages can only reach the 3rd realm. The 4th realm and the 5th realm are almost out of reach for cultivators, Imbai Hua said. Luo Fan's eyes couldn't help but brighten up when he heard that. According to his own experience, he instantly understood what the 5 realms of karma corresponded to in the blink of an eye. The 2 realms of knowing the cause from seeing the effect and knowing the effect from seeing the cause were clearly the level where one could see through the connection of karma and use the connection of karma to carry out divination. Although it was amazing, most cultivators in the Khanate Grand Luo realm could perfectly reach these 2 realms. Above the 3rd realm were the methods of using the law of karma. The 3rd realm, obtaining the effect from the cause, was clearly the first level of using the law of karma. In other words, it determined the cause and the effect and directly used the law of karma to complete the process, allowing the cause and effect to be established. The 4th realm, obtaining the effect from the cause, was clearly the 2nd level of using the law of karma. There was no need to determine the cause, only the effect, and the law of karma would naturally determine the cause and process, allowing the effect to be established. As for the 5th realm, obtaining the effect from the cause, it was even simpler. It was clearly the 3rd level of using the law of karma. Reversing karma. There's actually such a division. The path of cultivation is really broad and profound. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh. Although he didn't think that he was the only one who knew how to divide the realms of using the law of karma, he didn't expect the cultivation world to divide the levels of using the law of karma in such detail and accuracy. Even the preparation realm for using the law of karma, which he hadn't thought of before, was included. This indeed made him feel that his past knowledge was a little one-sided. However, obtaining the effect from the cause of karma doesn't seem to be very difficult. Why do you say that even a level 9 pseudo Saint would find it difficult to break through this realm? Luo Fan asked, because 100 Flowers fell silent when she heard that. At this moment, she was probably cursing Luo Fan in her heart. A well-fed person doesn't know the suffering of a starving person. It must be known that she was already a level 7 pseudo-saint, but her level of using the law of karma was still limited to the first level, which was the realm of obtaining the effect from the cause. For hundreds of millions of years, she had spent a lot of energy and effort in this aspect, but she still couldn't make a breakthrough. The person in front of her was only a level 3 pseudo-saint, but he had already surpassed her in this aspect. That feeling was more than just depressing and sullen. There's a tacit rule in the cultivation world that if any cultivator who hasn't become a level 9 pseudo-saint grasps the effect of karma, not only will they definitely become a level 9 pseudo-saint in the future, but their chances of becoming a saint will also be 100 times greater than others. Hunter Blossoms didn't directly answer Luo Fan's question, but instead said something like this. Instead, she said this. Not only did Luo Fan's expression change slightly, Huyin almost couldn't help but exclaim, "Definitely become a level 9 pseudo-saint." His chances of becoming a saint in the future were 100 times higher than others. Either one of these 2 points was enough to shock people to the point of losing their minds, let alone when both points appeared at the same time. One could imagine how strong the impact was. So there's such a legend. No wonder. Luo Fan finally understood why, because 100 Flowers would behave like this after knowing that he had grasped the karma of karma. She even decisively abandoned the level 3 pseudo-saint whom she had given away to escape for some unknown reason. All she wanted was for Luo Fan to end his karma with her. Of course, Luo Fan's own strength must also play a part in this. If because 100 Flowers could get rid of Luo Fan quickly and cleanly, then the brighter his future was, the greater the threat he would pose to her. Naturally, it would be even more impossible for her to let him go. It was also because 100 Flowers did not have absolute confidence that she could get rid of Luo Fan. She had no choice but to humble herself and change her attitude in an instant. She turned to curry favor with Luo Fan and use some benefits to make Luo Fan take the initiative to end his karma with her. This was so that in the future, when Luo Fan obtained great strength, he would settle the score and cause her trouble. When because 100 Flowers saw Luo Fan's expression, she knew that he had already understood. After thinking for a while, she said, "It is said that the Karma Sage once said that if there are cultivators below the level 9 pseudo-saint who can grasp the karma of karma, they can go to the Aparagodania state and become his disciple." Huyin finally exclaimed at this moment. There were 54 sages in the demon realm. Although this was a large number, every single one of them was omnipotent, omniscient, and omniscient. All the cultivators in the world, as long as they were determined to cultivate, naturally knew of them. Naturally, Huyin also knew which sage the Karma Sage was. Among the 54 sages in the demon realm, the Karma Sage was ranked at the top. Of course, the specific strength of the sages and the specific standards used to determine the specific strength of the sages were too far away for Huyin to understand. However, although she could not understand it from the front, she could guess the strength ranking of the various sages from the side. Among the 4 continents in the center of the demon realm, the Karma Sage's territory was ranked at the top among the 54 sages. From this, one could roughly guess that his strength was ranked at the top. This might not be accurate, but at least it was a standard that was accepted by most people. Under such circumstances, when she suddenly heard that the cultivator beside her, who seemed to be only slightly stronger than her, had a chance to be accepted as a disciple by the Karma Sage, the impact was like an ordinary person suddenly discovering that his friend was actually the richest person in the world. Just a little bit of wealth was enough to drown him to death. Impossible. Why have I never heard of this before? Huyin instinctively murmured. Because 100 Flowers was being questioned for no reason, her expression was naturally not good. She said indifferently, "This is something that happened hundreds of millions of years ago. At that time, you were not even born yet. How could you know these things?" This. Huyin opened her mouth, but finally did not know what to say. Luo Fan, on the other hand, was only excited for a moment before he calmed down. Being accepted as a disciple by the Karma Sage was naturally a great opportunity for ordinary people, but to him, it was not that great of a temptation. In particular, ever since he found out that the sages of the demon realm might not be real sages, but merely fake sages who had become sages through trickery. He already had a feeling of disdain for the sages of the demon realm. Even though the sages of the demon realm were powerful enough to make him despair, and each of them could easily crush him to death, it did not change the feeling of disdain in his heart. This was not because he looked down on their strength, but because he looked down on their choice. Chapter 1332. It was because of this mentality that Luo Fan did not look forward to becoming a disciple of the Karma Sage. He even faintly rejected it. After all, he did not want to walk the path of the Demon Realm Sage. He wanted to become a true sage. He wanted to become a saint without any shackles, a saint who could leave any world and be free in any world. If that was the case, if the Karma Sage was more responsible, he might change his path and make Luo Fan set foot on their path. If that happened, he would not even know where to cry. With this thought in mind, Luo Fan's expression became more and more awkward. He said, "I see. It seems that I was ignorant before. Aren't you excited?" Imbiwa suddenly asked curiously. Hee, what's there to be excited about? The British sage said so. So what? Luo Fan just smiled and said, "Your thinking is very strange." Imbiwa looked at Luo Fan as if she was looking at a complete stranger, a creature that she could not understand at all. Everyone has their own needs. Luo Fan smiled. I didn't expect it to be like this. I think that telling me about this is enough to end the karma between us. Because when 100 Blossoms heard this, he didn't sigh in relief like Luo Fan thought. Instead, he smiled and said, "That's not enough. I just said a few words. Compared to a level 6 pseudo-sage treasure, it's far less valuable. How about this? I'll give you another treasure map. There may be a level 9 pseudo-sage treasure or the secret to becoming a sage. It's just a little dangerous. What do you get from it? It's up to you." There's such a treasure map? Luo Fan's eyes showed interest when he heard this. He actually did not care much about treasures. However, he was extremely surprised that he could find a treasure map of a grade 9 pseudo-saint treasure, and he was quite interested in the exploration process. Of course there is. Imbiwa smiled. With that, she raised her hand and clapped. The void shook and a floral fragrance condensed into a map in front of her. This was a map. Compared to the world that Hu Yun had opened up to act as a map, the representation of this world was not as exaggerated, but it had its own unique profundity. There were many terrains on it, and people could smell all kinds of inexplicable fragrances at a glance. It was as if the fragrance of the flowers could be smelled through the eyes. The various lines and terrains drawn on the map were even more vivid and lifelike. It looked like a real world that was constantly changing with the passage of time. It was as if the real world was constantly developing with the passage of time. That appearance and the map world that Hu Yun had opened up each had their own merits. Luo Fan glanced at the map, and a strange expression appeared on his face. Because what kind of person was 100 Flowers? Naturally, he instantly noticed the change in Luo Fan's expression and could not help but be slightly surprised. He asked, "Why does fellow Taoist look so strange?" At this level, there was no longer a need to conceal anything. Luo Fan didn't say anything. He raised his hand and took out a world from his universe in his sleeve. He raised his hand and slapped it. The world unfolded and formed a world that was about the same size as the flower fragrance map. Because 100 Flowers looked at this world. Then, he compared it to the flower fragrance map that he had constructed and could not help but smile bitterly. So fellow Taoist already knows the location of this place. It seems like I made an unnecessary move. As it turned out, this treasure map created by 100 Flowers Fragrance was exactly the same as the one that Hu Yun had given him, the one she had found in the primordial world. However, compared to the world on the map, this flower fragrance map was more rough and not as detailed. Forget it. I think our karma can end here. Let's end this matter here. Luo Fan shook his head and put away that world. 100 Flowers frowned and said, "How can this be? How can karma be ignored? You should know that if we are not careful, we might be doomed eternally." Luo Fan didn't expect 100 Flowers to care so much about karma. Suddenly, He understood why the space-time tunnel that she had constructed would appear in the hands of the level 3 pseudo-sage, and why she would protect the level 3 pseudo-sage after that. Come to think of it, he had formed karma with the level 3 pseudo-sage in the past, so he gave that thing to the level 3 pseudo-sage, giving him a chance to escape from death. This was the only explanation that could explain why 100 Flowers would hand over the level 3 pseudo-sage to Luo Fan to deal with. She had no feelings for him at all. There was only karma. When she encountered a greater karma, it was really normal for her to send him up to settle the karma. Then what should we do? Luo Fan sighed. Since he knew what she was persistent about, Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to say more and asked directly. 100 Flowers was also hesitating at this moment. At this moment, he really wanted to resurrect the level 3 pseudo-sage and kill him again. Because of him, she had actually formed such a karma with this person with a promising future. At this moment, she didn't even know how to end this karma, so that the two of them would have nothing to do with each other from now on. After thinking about it, she finally sighed and said, I've gone through several trials at the location recorded on the treasure map, so I have some experience. Why don't I take you to that location and go through the trials that I've gone through to end the karma? What do you think? Go through the trials? Are there any trials at that location? Luo Fan asked curiously. He was actually quite interested in the location of the primordial world that Hu Yun had picked up. He had even made up his mind to go there when he had the time. Now that he heard information about that location, how could he not be curious? That location seems to be a test set up by a senior expert. Every time you pass a test, you can get a reward. I passed 6 trials back then and received 6 treasures as a reward. May I know why this test was set up? Luo Fan asked with a frown. I don't know. In fact, it seems that no one knows who it was and why it was set up. Why did they set up this test? Baiwa sighed. How many trials are there in total? Although Luo Fan was a little surprised that he couldn't find the purpose of the test, it wasn't incomprehensible. However, it wasn't incomprehensible. After all, 100 Blossoms hadn't completed all the levels yet. I don't know. However, I heard that a level 8 pseudo-sage passed all 33 trials, but he didn't come out completely. In the end, he left dispiritedly. 100 Flowers said. He didn't even reach the end of the 33 trials. Luo Fan was finally shocked. 100 Flowers, who was a level 7 pseudo-sage, had only passed 6 trials, but the end of the test was actually more than 33 trials. The difficulty of this test could be imagined. All right, I will go and break through this checkpoint. Luo Fan made a prompt decision. A level 7 pseudo-sage could only pass 6 trials, but he was quite interested. He had originally planned to go there when he had time, but now he suddenly felt that it was better to go there as soon as possible. Hearing that Luo Fan agreed to this method of ending karma, 100 Flowers finally smiled and said, All right, then shall we set off now? Luo Fan smiled and nodded. Then he said to Hu Yun, I'll return this to you. I'll go through that test with fellow 100 Flowers. Be careful in the future and don't let something like this happen again. As he said that, he raised his hand and handed a world wrapped in fog to Hu Yun. This fog was actually a world of its own. And in this world, there was a golden world that lay in a corner of that boundless world like gravel. And inside that golden world, it was like a primordial world that had just been born. Looking at this fog, Hu Yun could not help but have a look of disbelief on her face. This was because 100 Flowers could not see what was in this world, but she could clearly sense that the primordial world was in this fog through her connection with that primordial world. This was a chance to become a sage, and it had already been delivered to the person in front of her. Even if he did not return it to her, it was only right. Under such circumstances, the person in front of her actually handed this world to her so casually. It was easy to imagine how unbelievable this was. She could not help but have such an expression on her face. You're really going to give it to me? Hu Yun asked in disbelief. Could it be fake? Luo Fan frowned and said, Why aren't you picking it up? Is it fun to just leave it like this? As he said that, he raised his hand and threw the fog toward Hu Yun. Seeing the world flying towards her, Hu Yun was shocked. She hurriedly caught the world in a flurry. After grasping this world, the expression on her face kept fluctuating. After a while, she gritted her teeth and said, "I'll go with you. I know a secret passage that can lead you to the 8th trial. I can bring you there." The 8th trial. 100 Flowers' expression changed drastically when she heard this, and she asked hurriedly, "That's right," Hu Yun replied. "If you're willing to bring me to the 8th trial, I'll give this treasure to you." 100 Flowers said decisively. As she said that, she raised her hand and a silver hairpin appeared in her hand. This silver hairpin was obviously the level 6 pseudo-sage treasure that Luo Fan had controlled for a period of time. Looking at Yin Baihua's straightforward appearance, Luo Fan didn't know whether to laugh or cry in his heart. Just how much resentment do you have for this magic treasure? You're actually giving it away so easily. However, he also knew that 100 Flowers' actions were extremely normal according to her personality. This was because 100 Flowers was extremely obsessed with karma. If she followed Hu Yun through the secret passage and entered the 8th trial, she would form karma with Hu Yun. In order to end this karma, she had to give something of considerable value to Hu Yun. Only then could the karma be completely ended. Judging from her previous behavior, she obviously thought that this level 6 pseudo-sage treasure was comparable to passing through the first 6 trials. Relatively speaking, going straight to the 8th trial would definitely be comparable to the value of this level 6 pseudo-sage treasure. Hearing this, Hu Yun opened her mouth and showed a struggling expression. At the same time, she could not help but steal glances at the silver hairpin. This silver hairpin was not only a level 6 pseudo-sage treasure, but it also looked extremely beautiful. It was extremely exquisite and made people unable to put it down. Naturally, Hu Yun was no exception. "I think this is fine. Anyway, there's no difference between one person and 2 people going through this secret passage." Luo Fan saw Hu Yun struggling and said with a smile. Hu Yun was already wavering. Just as Luo Fan said, there was no difference between bringing one person and 2 people. The reason why she hesitated and struggled before was because she was worried about Luo Fan. She was worried that Luo Fan would not be willing and would be unhappy because she agreed. That was why she was struggling. Since Luo Fan had already shown that he did not mind, Hu Yun naturally did not hesitate anymore. She immediately nodded and said, "Okay." When 100 Flowers heard this, a look of joy appeared on her face, and she did not hesitate to send the silver hairpin in her hand to Hu Yun. This allowed Hu Yun to reach out and hold the silver hairpin gently. After holding the silver hairpin, a look of joy appeared on her face. She was almost unable to let go of the silver hairpin. Since they had already reached a consensus, they naturally did not hesitate anymore. 100 Flowers raised her hand and patted the void, and a space-time passage appeared in the void. This space-time passage, of course, was not as stable as the one that Luo Fan had opened when he became omnipotent in a certain world, but it was still stronger than a naturally formed space-time passage. After the space-time passage formed, an aura that belonged to the demon realm came from it. Clearly, this was a space-time passage that led to the demon realm. When the passage finally stabilized, 100 Flowers said goodbye to the 2 of them, and the 3 of them stepped into the space-time passage. They headed towards the demon realm. The space-time passage was not very long, but there was no normal time in it. No one knew how long it had been. The 3 of them rushed out of the space-time passage at the same time and were bathed in the endless aura of the demon realm. After looking around, they realized that this was the place that they wanted to reach, the location of the strange trial. Clearly, 100 Flowers' control over that world had reached a certain level, and she could open the space-time passage anywhere in the demon realm. When Hu Yun saw this, her face was naturally filled with astonishment. This kind of method was still too profound for her. To her, she could not do this even in the world that she had opened up herself, let alone the high-level world that 100 Flowers was in. At this moment, she felt an indescribable sense of admiration for 100 Flowers. However, Luo Fan's expression was much calmer. This kind of method was something that he had never played before. How could he be shocked by it? This was a vast ocean, and there was no land on the surface. If an ordinary person came here, they would not think that there was a hidden place that could attract the attention of a pseudo-sage existence. However, everyone present was at least a level 3 pseudo-sage, so they could naturally see through the mystery at a glance. Just looking at the map was already quite shocking. I didn't expect to see it with my own eyes. Luo Fan sighed in admiration. In his eyes, this place was filled with layers of space-time. It was unknown how many layers of space-time overlapped in front of him, almost forming a huge and strange flower with endless petals. Under the effect of the laws of the demon realm, it was like a real flower dancing in the wind. Hearing Luo Fan's praise, 100 Flowers and Huyin looked at each other with an inexplicable smile on their faces. It was obvious that the two of them had felt this way when they first came here, which was why they were behaving like this now. Luo Fan sighed for a while, then said to 100 Flowers, "Let's settle our karma first." 100 Flowers brought Luo Fan here to settle their karma. In other words, they brought him to the 6th stage of the many stages and obtained the reward for clearing the first 6 stages. Huyin came along to bring Luo Fan around the many stages and straight to the 8th stage to repay Luo Fan's kindness. Since that was the case, there was only one sequence that Luo Fan could choose, and that was to first follow Embark through the checkpoints, reach the 6th checkpoint, and obtain the rewards for clearing these checkpoints. Then, he would come out again and be led by Huyin through the secret passage to the 8th checkpoint to obtain the treasures in the 8th checkpoint. Although this seemed a little complicated, it was the only way to maximize their resources and not waste their good intentions. Of course, Luo Fan's considerations were not complicated. Be it Huyin or 100 Flowers, they had already thought it through and naturally had no objections to Luo Fan's arrangements. Immediately, 100 Flowers nodded and said, "That's right." As she spoke, she did not hesitate and lifted a finger. A floral fragrance rushed out of her hand and fluctuated in the void. In the end, it turned into the shape of a key and inserted itself into the layers of space-time. As the fragrance entered, the layers that resembled a strange flower began to tremble violently. Then, the outermost petals of the strange flower trembled slightly. Many petals gathered around the fragrance and finally formed a door that was about 10 meters tall. The inside of the door was gray and blurry. It was impossible to see what was inside, nor could one tell what kind of place it led to. One could only feel that there was a space-time behind the door. This is the door to the 1st stage. I condensed this key based on the aura of the 1st stage. It can directly open the door to the space-time where I passed the test. It won't be randomly assigned to a different space-time like the others. This way, we'll have more confidence in passing the test and won't have to rely on luck, 100 Flowers explained. Chapter 1333. An indescribable feeling surged in Luo Fan's heart the moment he stepped through the door. It was as if there was an emotionless eye looking down at him from above, analyzing everything about him. This feeling instantly made Luo Fan's hair stand on end. His body shook violently, and a strong and unparalleled power rushed out of his body. Countless inexplicable subtle changes were born in the entire demon realm, and even in countless worlds outside the demon realm. Finally, they gathered in one place and changed the characteristics of his power, turning it into an indescribable, isolating power. Under this isolating power, Luo Fan's entire body seemed to have disappeared in an instant. It was as if Luo Fan had never existed in this world. At this moment, Embark and Huyin, who had rushed in behind Luo Fan, felt an inexplicable shock because they suddenly realized that Luo Fan's figure in front of them had suddenly become faintly discernible. It was a feeling that no matter what they did, they would not be able to grasp him, causing them to be inexplicably shocked. Between the two of them, one was a level 3 pseudo-saint, and the other was a level 7 pseudo-saint. Such a realm was already considered to be at the absolute top in the entire demon realm. It was extremely easy for them to open up a world, evolve a world, and destroy a world with a wave of their hand. Someone who was so close to them suddenly became difficult to grasp in their eyes. This kind of thing was something they had never imagined before. In fact, in their imagination, only a level 9 pseudo-saint could make them feel this way. Under such circumstances, how could the two of them not be shocked when such a change suddenly occurred to the level 3 pseudo-saint Luo Fan's body? How could they accept it calmly? While the two of them were in shock, Luo Fan's figure gradually returned to normal. However, his expression had turned extremely ugly, and a ruthless aura gradually emerged from his body. After a long time, only then did the ruthless aura gradually calm down. Only then did his expression barely regain its calm. I was too careless this time. I didn't expect that I would fall here because of a moment of curiosity. Luo Fan sighed. These words naturally caused Yin Baiwa and Hu Yun to be completely confused. They did not know what he meant by that. However, after all, the two of them were not ordinary women. The moment they heard Luo Fan's words, an ominous feeling quickly emerged in their hearts, as if they had overlooked something. "Why do you say that?" Yin Baiwa probed. Luo Fan shook his head and said, "It's nothing. Let's take a look at this checkpoint. There are some things. It could only be sensed, not conveyed." There was no way he could tell Yin Baiwa and Hu Yun what he felt just now. Just now, when Luo Fan sensed that he was being watched and analyzed, he used his own power to utilize the second level of the law of causality. In other words, the mysteries of karma without karma. He added the mysteries of blocking that gaze onto his own power, causing those powers to isolate that strange gaze as much as possible. However, the result was extremely disappointing. Although the feeling of being watched had weakened due to his actions, it hadn't disappeared at all. Instead, it was constantly pressuring him, causing the powers around him to feel pressured. Moreover, it was a feeling that was getting stronger and more terrifying. In the end, this feeling finally broke through Luo Fan's endurance. He directly crushed that wave of power, exposing his body to that strange gaze once again. He was once again being watched and observed. He was enveloped by the feeling of being studied. In other words, Luo Fan's sudden return to normal was not his own action, nor was it his own choice. Instead, it was because he could not maintain this state at all. It was the result of being pressured by some invisible gaze from the outside world. Although he didn't know what kind of existence that gaze belonged to, he clearly knew that the owner of that gaze was an existence that he couldn't resist at all. It was an existence that he couldn't resist at all. This place was very likely to be that existence's domain. Entering this place was equivalent to sending himself to the hands of that mysterious existence, placing his fate directly in the hands of that existence. Under such circumstances, it would be strange if Luo Fan could feel any better. With a thought, Luo Fan said to Yin and Baiwa, "I want to test it out." Luo Fan was not imprisoned by the two of them, so they naturally could not stop him from doing what he wanted to do. Thus, the two of them naturally nodded their heads and said that they were free to do as they pleased. Although they had no idea what exactly Luo Fan wanted to test, Luo Fan nodded and walked towards the door that they had entered from. Just now, after the three of them passed through the portal in the demon realm, they entered an extremely strange, white space where no matter could be seen at all. Although the door that the three of them passed through was very ordinary, it was extremely obvious in this space, extremely conspicuous. The door did not obstruct Luo Fan. He easily passed through it and appeared in the demon realm. I still can't avoid it. After returning to the demon realm, Luo Fan's expression became even more unsightly. That was because he discovered that even though he had already left the white space and left the so-called first checkpoint, the gaze that was looking at him from above, watching him and analyzing him, was still there. It was so much so that it was not any weaker than when he was in the white space. It was still so powerful, so obvious, and so hair-raising. It felt as if that gaze had already locked onto him. Looks like I still have to explore it. Luo Fan sighed. He turned around and re-entered the door, arriving in the white space once again. That gaze was locked onto him because he had entered the white space. Since that was the case, he had to get rid of that gaze. Of course, he could only search through the many checkpoints. What's going on? Luo Fan was extremely depressed. I wonder what the result of your experiment is. Inbaiwa asked curiously. Her words clearly meant that she wanted to find out what exactly Luo Fan was testing. It directly showed how curious she was about Luo Fan's behavior and how she wanted to investigate the change in Luo Fan's expression just now. Now, Luo Fan was even more certain that even if he said it, it would be useless. Naturally, he would not say anything more. He just shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I'm just looking at this checkpoint. It's all white here. How do I pass it?" Inbaiwa was naturally a little disappointed that Luo Fan was avoiding the topic. However, he could not say anything more. He could only follow along with Luo Fan's words and said, "It's very simple. You just need to find the key to the next checkpoint." Key? Is it the kind of key that you condensed with the fragrance earlier? Luo Fan frowned and said, "It's generally similar, but the specifics are naturally different." Inbaiwa smiled and said, "Please follow me. I've passed this checkpoint countless times. I'm very clear about where the key is." As she spoke, she took a step forward without hesitation and seemed to be moving forward aimlessly in this vast expanse of whiteness. Since Inbaiwa had already said so, Luo Fan naturally would not hesitate. He immediately followed. As he walked, Luo Fan gained a deeper understanding of this space. This space looked very ordinary. It seemed to be just an ordinary space. However, it was actually a colossal world. The area of this colossal world was not very wide. It was originally boundless and compressed to this rather narrow appearance. However, the interior of this space was filled with endless destructive power. These destructive forces existed in an extremely balanced state in this space. As they interweaved and mixed, this space turned into a vast expanse of whiteness, as if it was filled with boundless light. This kind of terrifying destructive power was extremely terrifying in itself. Now that it had been compressed to such a state, its power was countless times stronger than before. Even a level 1 pseudo-sage existence could disrupt the balance of this destructive power. If he allowed the destructive power to completely erupt, there would only be one word for him: death. Even if it wasn't a level 1 pseudo-sage, but a level 3 pseudo-sage, they would not die from the explosion of the terrifying destructive power. However, they would definitely suffer serious injuries and would not be able to recover for a long time. In order to avoid the explosion of the destructive energy, one's every move had to be in accordance with the profundity of equilibrium. One had to be extremely careful and cautious with every move. One could not afford to be the slightest bit biased. Luo Fan could already tell after taking a few steps. Inbaiwa seemed to be moving forward aimlessly in this white space, but in fact, her movements contained an extremely deep, profound meaning of balance. Even the slightest breath took into account the destructive power. Every movement created a new balance in an instant. Although the balance of the destructive power was disturbed, there was no possibility of it being broken. Looking at her movements, Luo Fan could not help but exclaim in admiration. A level 7 pseudo-sage was indeed a level 7 pseudo-sage. Although he could also do this, he could not do it like dew to the 100 flowers. Every movement of his had traces of the profound meaning of balance, showing that his movements were not ordinary. Instead, he was using some kind of mysterious technique. As for Hu Yun, although she could barely do this, she was far inferior to Luo Fan. Wisps of strange power continuously surged out of her body and returned to his body through his acupoints and pores. In the process, she constantly broke the balance and re-established it in an instant. Although she could also move freely in this white space, her method was more gorgeous than Luo Fan's. At the same time, it also meant that the traces of the axe were more obvious, but it was still inferior to Luo Fan's. This was because Inbaihua's movements were quite fast. Very soon, she had already walked tens of thousands of miles and stopped at a place. It was still a vast expanse of whiteness. At first glance, there didn't seem to be anything unusual. However, Luo Fan instantly discovered that there was a space here with traces of strange fluctuations that were constantly dissipating in all directions. These fluctuations were so obscure. If the three people present were not at least level 3 pseudo-sage, no one would have been able to discover their existence. It's here. Imbai pointed to the place where the strange fluctuations were coming from. When Luo Fan heard this, he thought to himself and said, "Let me try." This was the right thing to do. Imbai naturally would not have any objections. She immediately stepped aside and let Luo Fan come forward to face the place where the strange fluctuations were coming from. Although this was the first time he had felt this strange fluctuation and seen this strange place for the first time, what kind of person was he? Opening up a world and creating a universe were just ordinary existences. As long as he had a trace of a clue, he would naturally be able to find the most appropriate and most suitable method to achieve his goal. Moreover, Imbai had already directly pointed out that the fluctuation was a key. How could this only be a trace of clue? If he still could not refine that key like this, then there was no need for him to continue cultivating. He might as well just commit suicide. He carefully observed the location of the fluctuation. A faint smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. Then, as the power in his body surged, a key-shaped three-dimensional talisman suddenly formed. He casually slapped it, and it was placed into the space that was emitting the strange fluctuations. The moment the three-dimensional talisman entered it, the strange fluctuations began to surge violently. From its original obscure appearance, it gradually became more and more intense, more and more obvious. In the end, it even solidified, transforming into the illusory figure of a key. With a sudden shake, it completely merged into the three-dimensional talisman that Luo Fan had slapped out. As the illusory key slapped into the three-dimensional talisman suddenly turned from illusory to solid. From its original appearance of a three-dimensional talisman, it became a real key made of some unknown material. Boom! A loud explosion suddenly reverberated throughout the entire white space. This explosion came so suddenly that it was as if a vast and boundless world had been completely destroyed. Such a change. For Luo Fan and the other two, it didn't affect them at all. Even Luo Fan, who hadn't expected it before, didn't have any change in expression because of such a sudden tremor. For existences of their level, this sudden sound could not possibly cause any tremors in their hearts. After that explosion, more explosions rang out one after another. It was as if the end of the world had arrived, and they kept reverberating in the entire space. Amidst the rumbling sounds, the vast expanse of white space began to gradually change. Countless rays of light began to condense in the void in front of Luo Fan, causing a brighter and more dazzling light ball to appear in front of Luo Fan, as if there was an extra sun. As the explosions continued, the light ball became brighter and brighter. As the light ball became brighter and brighter, the entire white space seemed to gradually lose its light. A kind of nothingness gradually replaced the original white color. By the time the tremor stopped, the entire space had turned into a boundless void. In front of Luo Fan, there was no longer a white light ball like the sun. Instead, there was an existence that Luo Fan was very familiar with. It was an embryonic magic treasure of the half-step pseudo-sage level. Is this the reward? When Luo Fan saw this embryonic magic treasure, he did not know whether to laugh or cry, even though he was being stared at by those strange gazes. Exactly. This embryonic magic treasure of the half-step pseudo-sage level is quite precious. If anyone needs it, they're willing to exchange at least a level 3 pseudo-sage treasure for it. Imbai said with a smile. Luo Fan could not help but glance at Hu Yun, only to find that she had a look of disbelief on her face. Obviously, she was also shocked by the appearance of such an embryonic magic treasure. If she had known that she could obtain such an embryonic magic treasure of the half-step pseudo-sage level here, why would she have gone to the Treasure Luo conference to exchange her world with someone? However, her eyes soon turned gloomy. It was as if she had remembered that she had become enemies with that level 3 pseudo-sage male. Naturally, Luo Fan could not care less about Hu Yun's feelings. With a sigh, he put away the embryonic magic treasure of the half-step pseudo-sage level. Although he could refine an embryonic magic treasure of this level with the help of the caramelist fruit at any time, it was still a valuable treasure after all. Therefore, he was not unreasonable enough to give it up. After putting away the embryonic magic treasure, Luo Fan also realized this was only the first level. According to the previous difficulty, only level 1 pseudo-sage cultivators would be in mortal danger. As long as the cultivators were stronger than level 1 pseudo-sage cultivators, they would only be injured but not killed. The difficulty of this level was really not that high. After all, obtaining an embryonic magic treasure of the half-step pseudo-sage level was already considered a generous reward. So, what 100 Blossoms had said back then wasn't a lie. After Luo Fan put away the embryonic magic treasure, he suddenly realized that although the gazes on him did not disappear, there seemed to be some slight changes. It gave him a feeling that the gazes had become a little more amiable. Chapter 1334. Luo Fan sighed and made a grabbing motion. The 3D talisman that had turned into a real key left its original position and landed in his hand. Although he didn't know if it was the right decision to continue, this was the only choice he could make right now. It wasn't just because 100 Blossoms had promised to bring him there, but also because even if he left this stage and didn't challenge it anymore, that high and mighty gaze would still follow him. Only if he continued to challenge it would there be any change. Only then would he be able to get rid of that gaze, or find out the purpose of that gaze, and meet the owner of that gaze. With a thought, Luo Fan thrust the key in his hand into the empty space in front of him. As he did so, a strange ripple flashed from the key and instantly spread throughout the entire space. Then, one end of the key gradually turned into nothingness. Finally, only the tail remained in Luo Fan's hand. It looked as if the key had been inserted into the keyhole of a lock. After the 3D talisman absorbed the ripple and turned into this key, Luo Fan had long since understood how to use this key. Naturally, he didn't have any doubts. With a twist of his hand, as the key turned in the air, a clicking sound reverberated throughout the space. Then the air changed, twisted, and shook. A strange door appeared in front of them. This door was about 10 meters tall and looked gray and hazy. It was impossible to see what was behind it at all, nor could they see what kind of dangerous existence was behind it. There will be a battle inside this time. For existences like you and me, it won't be too dangerous. 100 Blossoms was experienced. Seeing this, she chuckled and said, as they spoke. She didn't wait for Luo Fan to move and stepped into the door first. Seeing her actions, Luo Fan knew that things weren't as simple as she made them out to be. That battle was probably going to be an extremely fierce one. Otherwise, with 100 Blossoms' abilities, why would she need him to personally step in and scout the path ahead? However, he didn't say much. He only told Hu Yin to be careful. Then, he crashed into the door. The instant he crashed into the door, he felt it. The grayish existence above the door seemed to wrap around his body. As he was enveloped by this dusky existence, he could feel his own strength, his own will, his own body, and his own perception. Everything about him that had extraordinary power was instantly sealed, as if he had entered another space, another world, another universe. Although he could still clearly feel their existence and could strongly grasp their pulse, no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't help but feel that he couldn't. No matter what he did, he couldn't mobilize them to fight the enemy. Is this level a test of combat ability under the same physical state and strength? Luo Fan was shocked. He tried his best to attack the strange sealing power, but no matter how hard he tried, he could not bring his magic power back. He could only maintain a body that was much stronger than an ordinary person. The changes gradually subsided, and the surrounding light and shadow gradually revealed the space he had entered in front of Luo Fan. This was a vast and boundless platform. Around the platform, there was a large number of towering buildings. There were more than hundreds of millions of faceless figures. These silhouettes stood there quietly. Every single one of them was extremely cold and calm. They stood there like statues, not far away in front of him, because 100 Blossoms was already fighting against 100 players. However, Compared to the level of the battle that Inbaiwa was supposed to participate in, the level of this battle was not high. Inbaiwa and those figures only had the physical quality of an ordinary person. Although the techniques they used were all very exquisite and could even be said to have entered the Tao, any bodiless immortal would be able to kill all of them in an instant. Obviously, even the level 7 pseudo-sage Inbaiwa had all her power sealed and was now just an ordinary person. Compared to an ordinary person, there was at most a world of difference between her martial arts and her combat skills. Just as Luo Fan stepped over, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. He raised his fist and was about to smash it at him. This fist drew an extremely strange trajectory in the void. The condensed power kept stacking and surging. In the end, it climbed to a level that was dozens of times more powerful than the person should have. It directly blasted towards Luo Fan's chest. In the face of this extremely exquisite fist, Luo Fan only smiled faintly. He raised his hand and waved it gently. In the midst of crackling sounds, his hand had already landed on the fist. With a little more force, the opponent's fist was directly smashed by his own superimposed power. The power even bounced back and affected the opponent's entire body, instantly shattering all the bones in the opponent's body. This originally ferocious man suddenly turned into a pile of meat paste. However, it was extremely easy. Luo Fan used the same power as that person and instantly erased this person. Luo Fan's attainments in martial arts were so profound that it could even be used to construct a worldview. How could these creatures, who were obviously created to fight, compare to him? Just as that person turned into a pile of meat paste, another two figures appeared in front of Luo Fan. They split into two directions and attacked him with great coordination. Seeing this, the smile on Luo Fan's face didn't change. He casually waved his hand again, drawing an incomparably mysterious trajectory in the void. His power slightly surged, hitting a certain key point of their bodies. In an instant, under the recoil of their own power, the bones in their bodies were shattered, and they turned into two piles of meat paste. Then, without any hesitation, 4 figures appeared in front of them. After killing them easily, there were 8 figures, then 16, 32, 64, and 128, 256. Like this, when Huyan stepped through the door, Luo Fan was already fighting 1,024 figures. At this moment, because of 100 blossoms, he was already fighting 2,048 figures. That scene, it was extremely tragic. If it was an ordinary person surrounded by more than 10 people, then only 5 or 6 people could really participate in the attack. No matter how many people there were, it would only be a matter of endurance, not strength. However, it was obvious that these people were not ordinary people. Although they only had the physical attributes of ordinary people, the level of their battle techniques was extremely high. However, the level of their battle techniques was extremely high. Their coordination with each other was so tacit that it was as if they were split from a gigantic monster. As they attacked, they formed a strange formation. Everyone's power was constantly flowing and stacking. Although there were only 5 or 6 people who came into contact with Luo Fan, they gathered all the power of the 1,000 people surrounding him. Because of this, their speed was at least 10 times faster than normal. This kind of attack was very obvious. The more people there were, the stronger they were, and the more dangerous the attack was. Facing this kind of attack, Luo Fan's movements were swift. As he moved, every move he made was imbued with all sorts of unimaginable techniques. He pushed his own power to the limit, and almost every move he made turned a figure into meat paste. With each passing moment, the more than 1,000 people besieging him were continuously decreasing in number. As their numbers decreased, the superimposed power of the formation formed by the human figures would naturally decrease. Their speed would also decrease. Their speed also gradually slowed down. Just like that, after a few dozen breaths, Luo Fan had already killed 1,024 figures. At this moment, 2,048 figures appeared around him and formed a huge formation. The 5 or 6 figures that were imbued with power and speed pounced directly at Luo Fan. Their momentum and speed were so great that even an ordinary cultivator would not be able to stop them. They would be completely torn apart and turned into meat paste. This was more than twice as strong as when there were more than 1,000 people before. However, in the face of such an attack, Luo Fan did not seem to be moved at all. Martial arts were originally fighting techniques. Defeating the strong with the weak and using the least amount of power to unleash the strongest power was a necessary characteristic of martial arts. Without this characteristic, a martial art could not be considered a complete martial art, as it still had countless times the chance to be modified and perfected. And obviously, with Luo Fan's current level of attainment, any martial art that he casually created would definitely be a perfect martial art. Moreover, it was a peerless martial art that could make anyone in the martial arts world give up everything in exchange for it. Under such circumstances, even if these people were coming at him aggressively and seemed to be able to shatter a mountain with a single punch, they were still just slightly harder rocks to him. They could not pose any threat to him at all. He did not even need to unleash his full strength. He only needed to slightly display a small martial art to easily twist the power of a few people, instantly shattering the others. Then, he would twist the power again and turn the people whose power was twisted by him into meat paste. Obviously, more than 2,000 people were still not enough to make Luo Fan, who had the same physical quality as them, feel any pressure. This time, although the number of people was double that of the previous 1,024 people, to Luo Fan, he did not need to double the speed of killing them. Instead, he only needed to increase his speed by half, and the many figures were already completely killed. In the process, Luo Fan glanced at the place where Enbai Hua was, only to find that she was already fighting with more than 4,000 people. I still can't beat her in speed. The means of a level 7 pseudo-sage are indeed not that simple. Luo Fan sighed, feeling a little helpless that his speed was actually not as fast as Enbai Hua. However, he did not know that while he was sighing because his speed was slower than Enbai Hua's, Enbai Hua was actually shocked by his speed. After all, Enbai Hua was a level 7 pseudo-sage. Although everything was now sealed, and her physical quality had returned to that of an ordinary person, her knowledge and experience were enough for her to display power and speed that far exceeded that of Luo Fan. Moreover, the most important thing was that she had entered this place much earlier than Luo Fan, and had been fighting for quite a long time. Although it was really only a short while for existences of this level, this period of time was enough to give her an absolute crushing advantage, and there was no possibility of turning things around. Under such circumstances, Luo Fan actually caught up with her so easily. While she was still dealing with more than 4,000 people, he had actually already started to deal with more than 4,000 people. This kind of advantage was rapidly shrinking. For Enbai Hua, the situation was about to be reversed, and one could imagine how shocked she was. Not far behind Luo Fan, Hu Yin was already fighting. Her opponent, just like Luo Fan and Enbai Hua, she also started from the same place and kept increasing in number. While Luo Fan was fighting with more than 4,000 opponents, she was already fighting with more than 100 people. That speed was also quite shocking. This was also normal, although she was far inferior to Luo Fan. However, he was still a level 3 pseudo-saint. There were really no secrets to her when it came to battles at the level of ordinary people. It was only natural for her to be fast in battle. The battle lasted longer and longer as time passed. More than 8,000, more than 10,000, 20,000 people, 40,000 people, the area of this battlefield was just too big. Even if there were battles of such a scale in 3 places, compared to the entire battlefield, it would still be like a drop in the ocean, as insignificant as a grain of sand on Earth. Therefore, although the number of people participating in the battle was increasing and the scale of the battle was increasing, the 3 of them were still fighting on their own and did not affect each other. For Luo Fan, the joint force of tens of thousands of people was still nothing. Although he spent a lot more time than at the beginning, in the end he was still able to completely wipe them out easily and turn them all into minced meat. However, when the number of people besieging increased to more than 100,000, the strength of the joint force, it had finally reached a level where even itinerant immortals could not resist it. For Luo Fan, it was getting more and more difficult to bear the pressure. Almost every time he fought, it would take him 2 to 4 hours to kill his opponents. Often, his body would have been attacked by the opponents. If he had been attacked by the opponents, the combined strength of more than 100,000 people would have acted on Luo Fan's body, which had now turned into a mortal body. Turning him into minced meat was the only result, and there would be no possibility of him getting hurt. However, as Luo Fan got used to being besieged, he was besieged by 100,000 to 1 million enemies. Although it was difficult, in the end, he still managed to resist the attacks of his opponents. He still spent a lot of time killing the figures that besieged him one by one, turning them into minced meat. Fortunately, although the sealing force had sealed his body, his strength, his speed, his willpower, his perception, and everything else, it was impossible for his natural physical quality to be completely sealed. In other words, although the strength and speed he displayed were at the level of an ordinary person, his recovery ability was still at the level of a pseudo-saint. This kind of recovery ability allowed him to squander his strength as he pleased. It was enough for him to fight for countless years without worrying about exhausting his physical strength or running out of stamina. It was also because of this almost cheating ability that Luo Fan could ensure that he was unscathed in such an exaggerated scale of besieging, and in turn killed his opponents completely. Is there no end to this? When a number finally exceeded 1 million, Luo Fan finally couldn't help but ask 100 flowers loudly. Most importantly, he looked at the number of people surrounding him. They were densely packed. Even though the three of them had killed tens of millions of people, the number didn't seem to change at all. The number of people seemed to be the same. It seemed that no matter how many people he killed, the number would not decrease. Soon, as long as we kill a certain number, we can pass this stage. 100 Flowers' calm voice sounded. Unknowingly, the number of figures besieging 100 Flowers had already decreased compared to Luo Fan. Of course, this was not because Luo Fan's ability to attract aggro was stronger than 100 Flowers, but because the speed at which Luo Fan killed had already surpassed 100 Flowers. At some point in time, he had already caught up to the time difference of entering the second stage of the test. In fact, although 100 Flowers didn't show it on the surface, he was still quite depressed about this fact. It was the same for Luo Fan. Although he didn't show a smug expression, he was still in a good mood. This was a comparison that the two of them made subconsciously, and not because they were trying to start something. Kill a sufficient number of them? How many did you kill the last time you passed? Luo Fan said helplessly. Not many. I just killed to the million level. 100 Flowers said. It's probably already surpassed that by now. I don't know about this. Maybe there are 3 of us, so the number is 3 times more. 100 Flowers said calmly. This kind of irresponsible words made Luo Fan feel helpless. However, he finally had a goal. Luo Fan focused and began to deal with the upcoming siege of over 1 million people. Chapter 1335. By the time Luo Fan managed to grind the 500,000 figures into minced meat with great difficulty, there were already nearly 1,040,000 figures surrounding him again. Once there were more than 1 million of them, the combined power of the many figures seemed to have broken a certain limit and instantly increased to an unimaginable height. Suddenly, a shadow appeared on the bodies of those figures that had gathered their power. A huge shadow that was getting bigger and more obvious. This phantom looked like a giant that covered the bodies of those people. Because of the existence of these shadows, the encirclement around Luo Fan had increased by more than 10 times. In other words, the space for Luo Fan to move had increased by more than 10 times. In such a huge space, what was really facing Luo Fan was no longer the original 5 or 6 figures. Instead, there were now 50 to 60 figures, or even hundreds of figures. However, these figures were also divided into 5 or 6 parts, and the connection between them was much tighter than the connection with the other figures. Their power gathered in one place, constantly strengthening the illusory figure that appeared outside the body of one of the figures, causing the illusory figure of the giant to seem to have more fulcrums and become more real. Such a change has actually occurred. It seems that if I don't think of a way, the formation that they have formed will probably undergo a qualitative change. Luo Fan thought to himself as he looked at the changes in front of him. Previously, the formation formed by more than 50 figures had already made him feel that it was extremely difficult to attack it. Normally speaking, when facing the formation formed by more than 1,000,000 figures, he should be in an even more difficult situation. He might not even be able to continue to withstand it. However, the changes that had occurred in this formation now gave him a greater chance. This was not difficult to understand. Although the gigantic phantoms seemed to be a lot more threatening, and the destructive power of every single move they made was much stronger than before, it was still not enough to stop them from attacking. However, because of their huge size, it also gave Luo Fan more space to move. And the space to move for the current Luo Fan was not as insignificant as it was for ordinary people or ordinary warriors. With enough space to move, he could display 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 times more moves. With enough space to maneuver, he would be able to display 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times more techniques. Countless combat techniques that couldn't be used due to the lack of space to maneuver could now be used. As such, fighting against millions of people was much easier for Luo Fan than fighting against over 500,000 people. They saw the giants were using all kinds of exquisite methods to attack Luo Fan in the center. But Luo Fan, although his speed and strength were very average, he was only at the peak of an ordinary person, but his entire body turned into an afterimage, moving rapidly in the void, and his speed kept increasing. His power continued to stack up, constantly evolving in the direction of surpassing his limits and surpassing the peak. Speed could be superimposed. Everyone knew this. If you used a special method to exert force while running, you would naturally be able to increase your strength by a lot. If you continued to exert force in the same way on the basis of the increase in speed, then your speed would increase. It could also continue to increase. The principle of speed stacking was actually very simple. However, for ordinary people, this kind of stacking had a limit because ordinary people's reaction speed could not support them at all. That kind of exertion method would lose its effect and interweave with the resistance, causing the speed to reach the limit. But for Luo Fan, when he was in good condition, he could cross the distance calculated by light years in the blink of an eye. With this kind of reaction speed, it was really easy for him to control a speed that had yet to surpass the speed of light. Under such circumstances, although his strength and speed were only at the limit of ordinary people, Luo Fan's speed became faster and faster as he moved, becoming more and more terrifying, finally reaching the limit that the human eye could react to. As a result, there seemed to be countless of him in the space where he moved, and he seemed to be everywhere. The overlapping figures filled up the space in the middle of the few giants. Similar to speed, power could also be superimposed continuously. Clenching a fist tightly against the body and taking a step back to throw out a punch, the power used in the two was about the same, but why could the damage caused to the opponent be completely different? This was because of the superposition of power. In the process of taking a step back and throwing out a punch, his power would be converted into speed and accumulated in a superposition method. In the end, when it was converted back into power, it would form the effect of superposition of power. The power would naturally be much stronger than exerting force against the body. By the same logic, when Luo Fan's speed had been superimposed to such a degree, his power had also been superimposed to an unimaginable level. This superposition made the battle between him and the millions of figures much easier and smoother than the battle between him and the 500,000 figures from before. In a few dozen breaths' time, he had already broken the giant shadow and crushed the figures that were wrapped by the giant shadow one by one, turning them into minced meat. After these giants were destroyed, the shadows of other giants would naturally appear. These shadows were also attacking Luo Fan and wanted to kill Luo Fan. However, it was clear that Luo Fan's speed and power had already been superimposed to such a degree that he was no longer afraid of any challenge. In other words, his momentum had already been formed, and he could no longer be stopped. In this way, nothing could stop him at all. With a wave of his hand or a kick, the giants were smashed one after another, and the figures were turned into minced meat. As more and more figures were smashed, the space he had to move around increased, causing his superposition of speed and power to increase continuously. The further he went, the more powerful he became, and the more unstoppable he became. In this way, the speed at which he destroyed the figures became faster and faster, and the difficulty also became smaller and smaller. In the end, the time it took him to completely smash the millions of figures into minced meat was only half of the time it took him to smash the 500,000 figures. Inbaiwa and Hu Yun were a little dumbfounded by such an easy method. He could actually reach this level with the body, strength, and speed of an ordinary person. Didn't that mean that if there were no restrictions, he would be able to accelerate eternally just by relying on his body alone? In the end, he could even break through time and space, and break through the limits of the world. At this moment, Inbaiwa was still tangling with the 500,000 figures, but she still hadn't killed them. As for Hu Yun, her performance was even worse. She was still tangling with tens of thousands of figures, and their numbers didn't even exceed 100,000. Of course, this wasn't because she wasn't strong enough. She really did need that much time to defeat these tens of thousands of figures. Rather, it was because she knew her limits. She knew that she could still endure these tens of thousands of figures. However, if the number of figures surrounding her increased to more than 100,000, she might already be unable to endure it. If the number of figures increased to 500,000, then what awaited her was very likely to be death by the encirclement. It was precisely because of this apprehension that she consciously slowed down her speed. She did her best to tangle with the figures within the limits of what she could endure, leaving the task of clearing the stage to Luo Fan and Inbaiwa. To be able to unleash such terrifying power, I can't even compare. Hu Yun sighed as she thought to herself. After these millions of people were smashed into minced meat, they still hadn't cleared the stage. Don't tell me I have to kill 1,000,000 people each? Luo Fan couldn't help but smile bitterly. At this moment, more than 2 million figures appeared out of thin air, enveloping him. This time, they seemed to have broken some sort of boundary. After the power of those 2 million figures gathered in one place, they actually changed the rules of space and time, forming a strange domain. A domain that seemed to have no gravity. Has it turned from a flat surface to a three-dimensional one? Luo Fan thought to himself. He saw that the figures around him were indeed three-dimensional. Not only did they surround him, but they also surrounded him from above and below. Moreover, more and more giant phantoms appeared around the human figures. From all directions, up, down, left, and right, they all attacked Luo Fan. Faced with this kind of attack, Luo Fan only smiled faintly. Compared to fighting on the ground, this kind of three-dimensional battle in midair, where he didn't face any resistance, was more complicated, but it was also something he was more used to. His superimposed speed and superimposed power didn't weaken because of this. Instead, they kept growing and improving, and the speed at which he destroyed his opponents was much faster than before. Because there was no gravity, the minced meat could only fly in the direction that Luo Fan had smashed them, splattering and spreading in all directions. In this way, it was still fine if there were only a few of them. As the number increased, the domain formed by the power of more than 2 million figures was filled with this endless amount of flesh and blood. All the figures, including Luo Fan, were gradually bathed in this flesh and blood. The entire domain had directly turned into a flesh and blood hell. It looked cruel and tragic, so much so that it was enough to make the minds of those with poor mental endurance collapse. Fortunately, it didn't take long. After spending about the same amount of time as the previous time, Luo Fan finally killed everyone to the point where they couldn't distort the rules and form a domain. When the domain shattered, the countless pieces of flesh and blood piled up on the ground and were finally absorbed by the platform, disappearing without a trace as if they never existed. This was exactly the same as the previous waves of living beings that had been killed by Luo Fan. Just as Luo Fan was about to continue killing, the sky and earth shook. In an instant, the silhouettes that originally existed on the platform, as well as the silhouettes surrounding the platform, all disappeared in an instant, as if they had never been there. Luo Fan was slightly stunned before he reacted. "So, I've already killed 3 million. His figure gradually came to a stop. Compared to superimposing speed and superimposing power, it wasn't that easy to stop one's body from being superimposed. Luo Fan, on the other hand, spent dozens of breaths of time to stabilize his body. I didn't realize it before, but now I suddenly feel that it's a little unbelievable." Luo Fan sighed. Using the body of a normal person, the strength of a normal person, and the speed of a normal person, he had killed over 2 million living beings in just a few short days. No matter how you looked at it, this kind of result was inconceivable. After Luo Fan stopped, the boundless platform beneath his feet began to gradually shrink. This shrinking speed was incredibly fast. It seemed to shrink by tens of thousands of kilometers in an instant. However, even this shrinking speed was nothing compared to the incomparably vast size of the platform. It was nothing at all. When Luo Fan stood firmly, he could feel that the platform was shrinking. So, it's absorbing flesh and blood. But is this a key or a reward? Luo Fan felt the change beneath his feet and asked curiously. It should be a reward for clearing the stage. As for the key, it's actually hidden underneath. Because Hunter Blossoms had long since experienced this, she naturally knew the answer to this question. Thus, after Luo Fan asked, she directly replied, "This time, I killed 3 times as many people as last time. The reward for clearing the stage should be different." Luo Fan's emotions had completely calmed down by now, and he smiled. "That's not for sure. 3 times as many might just be a punishment for having our help." Hunter Blossoms shook her head. Knowing that this was indeed a possibility, Luo Fan could only sigh. He quietly waited for the changes to the platform below. As the platform continued to shrink, the power suppressing Luo Fan's mana and cultivation began to gradually decrease. His body, strength, and speed, which could originally only be maintained at the level of a normal person, began to rapidly increase during this process. Transcendent power began to appear in his body again. With a thought, his body floated up into the air. He looked down at the shrinking platform from midair. It was similar to Luo Fan's. Hu Yun and Hunter Blossom's cultivation also returned, and their bodies also gradually floated up. After waiting for half a day, only then did the platform below finish shrinking, forming a strange ball of light. At this moment, the power suppressing Luo Fan's cultivation had also completely disappeared. His body was already relaxed at this moment, and the feeling of having everything under control that had disappeared for a few days had returned. The carefree feeling of having his body and mind complete made a smile appear on his face. However, this smile only appeared for a while before disappearing without a trace. Because he had already clearly seen what the ball of light was, a level 1 pseudo-holy embryonic magic treasure, Luo Fan couldn't help but feel helpless. A magic treasure of this level, even if it was an embryonic magic treasure, was really not much to him. As long as he was willing, he could use Karmaless Karma a few times to create one. Now that he had fought so hard for so long, the final reward for clearing the stage was only this. Of course, he felt that it was unfair. However, Luo Fan felt that it was unfair here, because Hunter Blossoms and Hu Yun both felt that he had gained a lot. After all, a level 1 pseudo-holy embryonic magic treasure was equivalent to an ordinary level 5 pseudo-holy treasure. Without much interest, Luo Fan put this magic treasure into his universe in his sleeve. After putting it together with the half-step pseudo-sage magic treasure that he had obtained before, he pointed and said, "That is where the key is, right?" The place he pointed at was extremely far away from where the 3 of them were, and the fluctuation was also extremely obscure. However, between Hunter Blossoms and Hu Yun, which one was simple? As they pointed, they naturally discovered the strange undulations coming from that direction. After secretly praising Luo Fan's calm attitude and not being moved after obtaining such a precious embryonic magic treasure, 100 Blossom smiled and said, "It's right there." After losing the platform below, the entire space of the second stage had turned into a void. Up, down, left, right, front, back, and forth were all nothingness. There was no point of force, nor was there any gravity. Even up and down were nothingness. They could only sense it by relying on their previous habits. Now that the location had been determined, Luo Fan did not hesitate. With a light step, his figure had already traversed tens of thousands of kilometers and directly arrived at the location where the fluctuation was emitted. When he arrived here, he casually clapped his hand again, and a key-shaped three-dimensional talisman appeared in front of him. It directly inserted itself into the core of the fluctuation and began to frantically absorb and pull the strange fluctuation. As the three-dimensional talisman absorbed it, the fluctuation that was emitted gradually began to shrink. Meanwhile, the key-shaped three-dimensional talisman gradually transformed into a key. Soon, a key appeared in front of him. Luo Fan casually waved his hand, and the key fell into his hand. When the key was in his hand, he felt that the supreme gaze that was looking down at him seemed to have become a lot more amiable. Although it still did not disappear, the creepy feeling that it brought him had subsided a little. What kind of gaze is that? Feeling the change in the gaze, Luo Fan's mood became extremely complicated. The next stage is completely different from this one. You have to be careful. 100 Blossoms had already arrived beside Luo Fan and said. This pulled Luo Fan out of his thoughts, and he curiously asked, "What is the next stage? Why do you seem to be a little nervous?" "I can't be sure if it will be the same as last time, but I can't say much. I will go and test it out first, and then you will know what kind of stage it is. There's not much point in saying it now. It might even cause some inexplicable changes in the stage if you say it out loud." 100 Blossoms shook her head and said. Hearing this, Luo Fan could not help but become more interested in the third stage. Chapter 1336. No matter how much he said, he still had to do it to be sure. Luo Fan's heart stirred, and the key in his hand floated up. With a slight tremble, the front of the key slowly disappeared. It looked as if the key was slowly inserted into a keyhole. When there was only one key left, it trembled slightly and began to twist slowly. As it twisted, a strange sound came from the void. Then a 3 zhang tall, dusky door appeared where the key was. The key had completely disappeared at this moment, as if it had never existed in the first place. Inbaiwa faintly smiled, nodded to Luo Fan, and stepped into the door. Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He gestured to Huyin and stepped through the door. It was the same feeling as when he passed through the door. Next, Luo Fan found himself in a strange world. This was a vast and boundless world. The sky was round and the earth was boundlessly vast. The sky was boundlessly high, and the terrain on the ground was undulating. It seemed to have all the terrains that a normal world should have. At this moment, 100 Blossoms was already engaged in battle with another person. What happened? Why is the battle so strange? When Luo Fan saw the battle clearly, he couldn't help but be slightly surprised. Because right now, because of 100 Blossoms and that person's battle skill from a fundamental perspective was so low that he couldn't even imagine it. Even in the previous round, when his cultivation had been suppressed, his physical strength, speed, and defense had been reduced to the level of a normal person. His battle skill was still higher than the two of them. The person who faced off against Inbaiwa was a young man. He and Inbaiwa exchanged punches, kicks, sabers, and swords in midair. However, although the two of them had 7 emotions on their faces, Luo Fan felt that as long as he was willing, he could just blow a breath at them. It could turn them into nothingness. This obviously couldn't be their true level. Then, the result was very obvious. Either they were suppressed by some kind of power that was even stronger than the previous stage, suppressing their cultivation state. Either that, or there was something wrong with this world. While Luo Fan was deep in thought, Inbaiwa, who was in the middle of a fierce battle, found an opportunity. With a single slash, she beheaded the man in front of her. A head that had died with a grievance flew into the sky, and the entire world seemed to be filled with a strange sense of joy. Then, an unimaginable power flowed out of the headless body. It continued to merge with the void. The amount of this power was enormous. The essence was so high. Even Luo Fan couldn't help but be shocked when he saw it. It could be said that the power that flowed out of this person's body in every instant was extremely powerful. It was probably enough to become a pseudo-saint level existence. But even with such a speed, the power in this person's body flowed for a full 15 minutes before disappearing. From this, it could be seen how powerful this person was. He had to be at least a level 6 pseudo-saint in order to have such a terrifying performance. However, even such a powerful existence had his head chopped off by Hua with a move that even ordinary martial arts experts couldn't block. His head flew into the sky, and all his power was absorbed by the world. It was such a strange contradiction. Luo Fan couldn't help but be deeply puzzled. While puzzled, he raised his hand and punched out. Although he didn't put all his power into this punch, he still had a lot of power left. But with the power of this punch, it would have been enough to completely shatter a large area of a void within a radius of 10,000 miles, turning everything in front of him into a gray haze. However, at this time, in this place, his punch actually didn't have any other effect. Not to mention shattering the space, even the sound of the wind couldn't be heard. It was even worse than an ordinary person who practiced martial arts. Such a strange change instantly made Luo Fan understand why the battle between Hua and that person was so strange. He also understood why that person's body changed so strangely after he was killed. This space, or rather, this world, actually had a despairing thirst for power. No matter what kind of power it was, this world would completely absorb it. Not even the slightest bit of power was left, whether it was the power that living beings used to attack their opponents, or the power that was left in their bodies after they died. This world wasn't willing to give up even the slightest bit. It was precisely because of this special characteristic of this world that all living beings that entered this world, no matter how strong they were, couldn't display a level that surpassed what this world allowed when they fought against their opponents. Just now, because of the battle between Hua and that man, they couldn't display a level that surpassed that of ordinary people. Of course, this was just a rough explanation. The rules were naturally countless times more complicated than this, and the restrictions were also countless times more numerous. For example, why did Luo Fan not feel that the world was absorbing his power? Only when he sent his power out would the world absorb it. For example, why was he able to use his power to fly? For example, because of 100 Flower's speed, why was her battle technique restricted? Faintly, she seemed so clumsy. All of these were naturally due to various rules. However, no matter how many rules there were, no matter what kind of rules there were, the most fundamental reason was still this world's thirst for power. Many other rules were only born from this foundation. How do we pass this trial? Do we also need to find the key? Luo Fan asked with a sigh. Now, he already knew why Hua couldn't tell if there were any abnormalities in this world. It would be a little strange to explain it clearly. Although it was possible, it would require too many words and consume too much energy. In comparison, it was better to see it with one's own eyes and see it directly. It would be faster. That's right. Hua's aura seemed to have changed slightly at this moment. She said, "This world is an absolute world of slaughter. There are countless living beings in this world. Some of them are strong, and some are weak. What we need to do is to find a living being with a special energy wave among the countless living beings, steal that energy wave from its body, and fuse it into the key." Countless living beings? These living beings can't be created by this world, right? That would be too heaven-defying. Luo Fan smiled bitterly. That's not it. Actually, these living beings are all projections of living beings that have passed the trial before. Or rather, you can't say they're projections. They're existences simulated by this world according to the template of those living beings. Compared to their original bodies, they aren't much weaker, but they can only exist in this world and can't leave. Baiwa shook her head. Those that have been here before? Does that include the living beings that have come here right now? Luo Fan couldn't help but ask in surprise. It should include them, but don't worry. Generally speaking, they won't encounter living beings like themselves. At least, I've never heard of such a thing happening even once. I've never heard of such a thing happening even once. Baiwa said, what pity. I wanted to see what's the difference between the replicated me here and the replicated me of the saints. When Luo Fan heard this, he didn't seem as happy as Baiwa expected. Instead, he seemed a little disappointed. Baiwa's expression shook slightly when she heard this. She said in surprise, so you've unified an island before? It's just a small island. It's not worth mentioning. Luo Fan just smiled. Even if it's just a small island, it's not simple. I once thought of unifying an island to try the Saints test. In the end, because I was worried about the difficulty of the test, I gave up in the end. Baiwa sighed. Baiwa didn't hide the fact that unifying an island might trigger the Saints test. She also didn't think that Luo Fan wouldn't know. So she directly revealed this secret that Luo Fan had spent a lot of effort to learn. At this moment, Huyin had already arrived at their side. When she heard Baiwa's words, she wasn't surprised by the content. Instead, she was shocked by Luo Fan's choice. Her face was full of admiration. It was obvious that she was also very clear about the Saints test. The level of power she came into contact with was different. There was a world of difference between what she knew and what she knew. For the cultivators who had failed to become pseudo-sages, the sage test would be triggered after an island was unified, and there would be a completely replicated island to compete with the unified island. This was the deepest secret, but for the real pseudo-sages, it had become common sense. However, even though he knew this, Luo Fan didn't regret the price he paid in exchange for this secret. The level of one's power would determine the type of secret one would come into contact with. Now, it seemed like it was just common knowledge. However, it was a real secret back then, unless he was willing to wait until now to find out about this common knowledge. If he wanted to know this back then, he could only exchange it as a secret. This was just like cultivation. From Luo Fan's current point of view, the Sage-to-Be realm, the innate grand Luo realm, the primordial pure Yang realm, everything was as simple as common sense. At a glance, there was no secret to it. But to him, who was at every level back then, the next level of cultivation was truly incomparably profound and mysterious. If he thought that these mysteries might become common knowledge in the future and didn't cultivate and study them in detail, how could he have made it to where he was today? He would have died a long time ago, and all traces of him would have disappeared without a trace. I didn't expect you to be so courageous. It's really admirable. Huyin praised. Hearing this, Luo Fan only smiled and said, it's not really courageous. It's just that my cultivation had reached a bottleneck back then, and I couldn't break through. So I had to use this to stimulate myself. Let's not talk about this anymore. More opponents are coming. At this moment, a few people in the distance seemed to have noticed Luo Fan and the others. They were rushing towards them at high speed. Looking at their expressions, they were incomparably fanatical, filled with boundless desire and boundless killing intent. They didn't look like they were looking at their opponents. Instead, they looked like they were looking at the food that was already placed on the table. Looking at their expressions, Luo Fan felt a little strange and asked, what benefits do we get from killing people here? For us, there aren't many benefits. It only slightly increases the power we can unleash. But for them, it's a chance for them to turn fake into reality. If they kill any one of us, they will be rewarded by this world. It will change their fate as a clone and give them a chance to escape from this world. Baiwa said, they can escape from this world. Luo Fan was shocked. That's just what they said. I wonder if anyone has ever done this since ancient times. Baiwa merely smiled faintly. Baiwa only smiled faintly and said, she seemed to be a little disdainful. Obviously, she didn't take this legend to heart. She didn't think that these living beings that could only exist in this world could escape from this world. Hearing this, Luo Fan's expression became a little better, but it was only a little. There would be no waves without wind. Since such a legend existed, there were probably living beings that escaped in the past. Otherwise, this legend would have been overturned a long time ago. However, now wasn't the time to argue about it, because those people were already charging over. They started to surround the three of them, because Imbiwa had already killed one person. The strength that she could unleash now was much stronger than before. At the very least, she had reached the level of a martial arts expert. Her strength and speed had increased by quite a bit. However, Luo Fan and Hu Yun had only just stepped into this world. This encirclement was only their first battle. In this kind of situation, the strength that the two of them could unleash could be imagined how weak they were. Just now, Luo Fan had already tried to attack the empty space and knew the thirst for power in this world. The strength he could display was countless times smaller than normal. However, after fighting them for real, he realized that this suppression was all-encompassing. Not only was he unable to unleash his strength, he couldn't even unleash his speed and precision. They had all been weakened to the limit. With his strength and speed weakened, his attacking and dodging abilities would naturally be greatly weakened. The effect of an actual attack would naturally be weakened to an unimaginable degree. In the past, Luo Fan had encountered this quite a few times. In fact, it was almost a habit. However, having his precision weakened was the first time Luo Fan had encountered something like this. Usually, when describing combat skills, martial arts, or even divine abilities, they all had the adjective exquisite. And the essence of exquisite was obviously precision. And precision was the degree of precision. Clearly, if the precision of an attack was weakened, no matter how good one thought, the final result would be greatly reduced, and it would be difficult to achieve true results. What exquisite and indescribable martial arts! What moves that could increase one's power by 1,000 times? None of it would work. The moment the battle unfolded, Luo Fan finally understood why the level of the battle between Hundred Blossoms and that man had seemed so low. Fortunately, Luo Fan's attainments in martial arts had already reached an unimaginable height. After his precision was weakened to the extreme, he quickly adjusted his movements. His movements became rough and barbaric, and he only used his strength to unleash it fiercely, completely abandoning all small changes. He forcefully endured the attacks of the three people surrounding him and chased after one of them. That kind of appearance wasn't much better than a street thug's fight. It didn't show the proud demeanor he had in the previous stage, where he could use his limited strength and speed to withstand the attacks of over 1 million people. Fortunately, while he was weakened, his opponents were also weakened. As a result, after forcefully enduring a few attacks from his opponents, he finally found an opportunity. He pulled out a blade from his universe in his sleeve and stabbed it into the chest of one of them. Because he had already predicted that his precision wouldn't be high enough, he had already prepared for this blade, aimed at the heart to not hit the target. As a result, he had already made preparations before he attacked. After stabbing the long blade into the chest, he suddenly turned, pulled, and directly cut open the opponent's abdomen, instantly splitting the opponent's body in two from the chest. If the waist was separated, this person could still live for a few minutes and could even write a dozen or so words on the ground. But if it was separated from the chest, that was completely impossible. The moment that person was separated, he lost his life, and his body split into two halves, falling down. At this moment, a strange feeling of joy spread through the world, allowing everyone present to clearly feel this joy. Afterwards, the two halves of the body continuously flowed with increasingly powerful and terrifying power, gradually merging into the surrounding space. At this moment, Luo Fan didn't have the mind to care about this person. He swung his blade horizontally, blocking the longsword stabbing towards his back in the nick of time. His body dodged, evading the sneak attack of the mace beside him. After killing one person, he felt that the strength, speed, and accuracy he could unleash had increased by a lot. Although it was still extremely far from the level he displayed in the previous stage, it could even be said to be a world of difference. But compared to before, it was already a lot better. At the very least, he was able to display some martial arts that had fewer variations. Chapter 1337. After he easily dealt with the three people surrounding him, he looked over and saw that Imbiwa had also dealt with her opponent. On the other side, Hu Yun's performance was much worse. At this time, she was still entangled with her opponent. Not to mention that she couldn't defeat them. She was even in a somewhat difficult situation, with wounds appearing on her body from time to time. Seeing this, Luo Fan didn't hesitate. He pounced over and slashed a few times, cutting off half of their bodies. Those people were already quite powerless when they surrounded Hu Yun. They couldn't even suppress Hu Yun after such a long time. How could they resist now? Hu Yun slashed at them a few times, and they were beheaded. The process was the same as when Luo Fan killed his opponents. Boundless energy flowed out of the corpses and was absorbed by the world. Hu Yun's expression seemed to improve a lot, as if a hint of understanding flashed through her eyes. When Luo Fan saw this, he knew that she had also gained a lot of benefits from killing her opponent. Now, the strength she could display had been greatly improved. After everything calmed down, Luo Fan asked, "Where's the key? It can't be random, right?" "It's not really random, but there's a very special requirement. You have to kill a sufficient number of opponents for the key to appear. Also, it usually appears next to you." In Hundred Blossoms said, "Kill a sufficient number of opponents." Luo Fan heard this and showed a helpless expression. It seemed to be the same in the second stage. Only by killing a sufficient number of opponents would a special change appear in the world. Only then would he be able to see if... Seeing this, Luo Fan sighed and said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's kill them." Although In Hundred Blossoms didn't say how many opponents they had to kill, it should be related to their abilities. When would they be able to recover their strength? Once they recovered their strength, the number of kills would probably be about the same. Afterwards, Luo Fan and the other two continued to search, fight, and kill in this world. This world was vast and boundless, and there were many living beings in it. Moreover, this world seemed to have a special characteristic, which was that any living being that was killed would be killed. They seemed to be able to resurrect at any time. It was as if he had rejoined the battle. Therefore, in such a search and killing, Luo Fan and the others even encountered the same opponents more than once. As for those opponents, it seemed that every time they were killed, the strength it could display would increase by a level. As the number of targets they killed increased, the strength of the opponents Luo Fan and the others encountered also increased. This kind of increase in strength was very miraculous, and it was similar to the increase in strength of the three of them. In other words, in such battles, the opponents that Luo Fan and the other two encountered were generally similar in strength to them. However, the battle did not turn into a massacre because of the increase in strength that they could display, and the massacre became a matter of course. This kind of day, 3 years passed in a blink of an eye. 3 years later, the number of living creatures killed by Luo Fan and the other two had already exceeded hundreds of thousands. The strength that the three of them could exert had also increased to the pseudo-sage level. Their opponent's strength had also risen to the pseudo-saint realm. That was such a profound cultivation realm. Normally, the three of them could completely shatter the entire world with a slap and turn the entire world into nothingness. However, the reality did not develop in a normal way. The reality was that even if the opponents they encountered were also pseudo-saint realm, even if the intense battle between them was enough to completely destroy the entire world, it did not affect the world at all. Or rather, it did not mean that it did not affect the world at all, but the destruction of the world was extremely weakened. The entire world seemed to be of a higher level than the great heavens and earth. No matter how they wantonly unleashed their power, the most they could do was shatter rocks and other physical objects. What space, what time, what rules, everything was not damaged because of their battle. Regarding such an abnormality, Luo Fan and the other two finally came to a conclusion after studying it for a long time. In fact, the mechanism that suppressed their strength did not gradually relax, as they felt. Instead, it was still there. It was just that this mechanism had changed from the method of suppressing their strength to the method of transferring, changing, and finally throwing it into their opponents to attack their opponents. Because of this change, it seemed that they had already exerted their strength. However, in fact, they were still exactly the same as before. It was just that the simulated power in this world seemed to have changed. Because of this, the power that they exerted could not destroy the time and space of this world, and could not really affect the rules and laws of this world. Hee. As long as I kill all of you, I'll be free. A being that seemed to be a level, one pseudo-sage being stood in front of Luo Fan and the others and chuckled, Hee. As long as I kill all of you, I'll be free. You're alone, but there are 3 of us here. Luo Fan looked at the figure and said with a faint smile, You're just flowers in a greenhouse. How can you know how to fight like us who fight all day? I alone am enough to easily kill the 3 of you. The figure surrounded by black fog said. Faced with such an existence, Luo Fan could no longer be bothered to speak. The opponent was just one person, and the one who attacked was naturally Luo Fan. Therefore, he took a step forward and raised his hand to slap the figure. In such a slap, countless worlds evolved in his hand and collapsed with a loud bang. This happened over and over again, and countless forces that were enough to completely destroy the vast 1,000 worlds erupted. They were bound and stacked together as they slapped towards the figure in the black fog. Under normal circumstances, such an action would definitely destroy a large part of this world, even if it was the demon realm. However, in this place, under the effect of the strange mechanism that Luo Fan and the other 2 had analyzed, such an action did not cause any changes in this world. The space-time of this world was still as stable as before, and the laws and principles of this world were still as stable as before, completely unaffected. It was as if this slap was just a very normal slap from an ordinary person. Since this world could treat this slap as such an ordinary slap, his opponent naturally would not treat it the same way. The power of this slap would be completely used on him. The effect would also be completely unleashed on his body. Faced with such a slap, his expression changed, and he cursed. He turned his body, and his whole body turned into a big hand. It directly slapped towards Luo Fan. Looking at that posture, it seemed that he did not just want to kill Luo Fan. He also wanted to slap Yin Baiwa and Hu Yun, who were beside Luo Fan, to death. The slap that his whole body turned into did not create any world, but there was an extremely pure destructive force that even repelled everything else surrounding his body. It made his power extremely powerful and extremely terrifying. In the midst of the crushing, the momentum of Luo Fan's slap suddenly stopped, and the world that appeared in his hand, which was constantly being born and constantly being destroyed, completely disappeared in an instant. Sure enough, he has the capital to be proud. Luo Fan secretly exclaimed when he saw this. This person's strength was at least above level 6 pseudo-sage. Only an existence of this level could exert the power of level 1 pseudo-sage to such an extent. Only an existence of this level could exert the power of level 1 pseudo-sage to such an extent. Only he could bring such pressure to him. However, even so, Luo Fan was not discouraged. Since his slap had no effect, he instantly turned around and raised his hand. A strange passage instantly appeared in front of his opponent's slap, and in an instant, it led the big hand in another direction, directly forming a ring. This passage was extremely strange. It had the characteristics of a space-time passage, and it was even more stable than a space-time passage. Even if the big hand contained infinite terror and extremely pure destructive force, it could only slightly expand the passage, but it could not destroy it. What is this? Such a horrified roar came from the passage. Don't you know this? This is the power of this world. Hearing this, Luo Fan sighed and said. As he spoke, he squeezed his hand. In an instant, the passageway trembled slightly and was instantly pressed inwards. The entire passageway turned into a small dot and then exploded with a loud bang. Boundless, terrifying power leaked out from it and was rapidly absorbed by the world. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. The moment the passage disappeared, Luo Fan felt his body become relaxed again. Then he felt that the strength that he could exert had increased to the level of a level 2 pseudo-sage. Obviously, he had obtained great benefits from it. The passageway he had created just now was none other than what he had gained through his understanding of the strange mechanism of this world over the past few days. As a cultivator, as a powerful cultivator who could cultivate to the level of level 3 pseudo-sage, the understanding of the laws of the world and the great Tao of the world was a kind of instinct. Normally, when he was in another world, the strength that he could exert far exceeded the power of the laws of this world. Naturally, he would not care about the laws of the world. However, it was different in this world. Here, this world could actually allow him to exert such terrifying strength, but it only had the effect of an ordinary person. One could imagine how mysterious the laws of this world were. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan not think about how to use these laws for his own benefit? It was because of this thought that led to the emergence of the passageway just now. It seems that as long as we meet a few more people, we should be able to find that key, Luo Fan said as he let out a long sigh. Perhaps it won't be that simple. Inbaiwa sighed at this moment. Why do you say that? Luo Fan could not help but be surprised. I'm a cultivator who set foot on the 7th step. Even if I kill a few more, your strength will only increase to the 3rd step. I'm afraid that won't be enough to cause the key to appear. Inbaiwa smiled. Luo Fan could not help but be expressionless. After a while, he said, I suddenly realized that it doesn't seem to be the right choice for me to go through the levels with you. Inbaiwa chuckled, but did not say anything else. She could not be blamed for this. According to her original plan, she should be doing everything that Luo Fan was doing. In this case, Luo Fan only needed to watch from the side. Naturally, she would be able to bring him through the checkpoints, continuously advancing, and finally reaching the 6th checkpoint. But now, Luo Fan did not want to do this. He did not want to be a freeloader. If he wanted to do it himself, her existence would instead become a burden. Instead, it would make Luo Fan need to achieve a higher goal in order to pass the levels. This was not something that she could think of. However, this was also Luo Fan's own choice. If Inbaiwa was willing, she could also find a reason to refute. But why would she do that? In any case, the one in trouble was Luo Fan. He was the one who would be burdened, and she only needed to watch from the side. If she refuted and even won, wouldn't she have to make him do the hard work and pass the levels himself? That was not a good choice at all. Luo Fan was just saying it. Of course, he knew why. However, to him, independence was a code of conduct that was engraved in the depths of his heart. Even if he knew that Inbaiwa wanted to pass the levels, he would not refuse even if he watched from the side. However, he could not do this. So, at this time, he could only helplessly continue to search for opponents. He continued to fight. His previous battle with that person had caused a huge commotion. At this moment, all the nearby living beings began to gather here. Facing these living beings, Luo Fan naturally did not hold back and directly pounced forward. He did not test them and directly sent a passage over, enveloping them. Then, the passage was destroyed, and all of them were instantly destroyed. All of their power returned to the world. The entire process was extremely easy and pleasant. After killing these people, Luo Fan felt that the strength that he could exert had increased to the peak of level 2 pseudo-sage. He only needed 1, or at most 2 or 3, to break through and fully exert the strength that he had. At this stage, Luo Fan suddenly thought of a question and asked Inbaiwa, Wait, if I recover to my peak strength and defeat my opponent, what will happen? Continue to improve, Inbaiwa said matter-of-factly. Improve? I can continue to improve without reaching a higher realm? Luo Fan was even more curious and asked, Of course, if you continue to kill, you can continue to improve until you reach level 7 pseudo-sage. Only then will you truly reach your limit. At that time, I believe that will be the time when the key appears, Inbaiwa said. Level 7 pseudo-sage. Hearing this, Luo Fan's fighting spirit rose even higher. When he was level 3 pseudo-sage, he could resist level 6 pseudo-sage and even fight level 7 pseudo-sage. However, this did not mean that he was no longer curious about the world in the eyes of level 7 pseudo-sage. He was not curious about what level 7 pseudo-sage felt like. This was his goal. How could he not be curious? At this moment, when he heard that he could feel the various aspects of level 7 pseudo-sage here, how could he not be interested? A few hours later, the moment Luo Fan killed the 2 opponents he found, he felt that his whole body was clear. He felt that he could perfectly exert his strength, and his whole body was extremely relaxed and free. This was the feeling that the restrictions that the world imposed on him had been completely broken. This meant that the strength that he could exert had truly reached the level of level 3 pseudo-sage. Feeling satisfied, Luo Fan raised his hand and clapped it lightly. The passage that was created by borrowing the laws of this world appeared in front of him. Compared to before, this passage was much larger and more stable. It even produced an indescribable suction force that seemed to be able to naturally change according to his mind, sucking in any living creature that he wanted to suck into it. Obviously, its power had been greatly increased. This was the difference between being restricted and not being restricted. For example, if a person was locked in a cage, no matter how powerful he was, he could only use the cage to do some limited things. However, if this person had already left the cage, he could even melt the cage and recast it into a few blades, guns, or even cannons. The power would naturally be countless times stronger than fighting in the cage with the help of the cage itself. With a wave of his hand, the passage was instantly destroyed and turned into nothingness. After doing this, he carefully sensed it and found that it was just as Baiwa had said before. He really did not feel any aura from a key. For a moment, he could not help but feel both anticipation and helplessness. He was naturally anticipating being able to feel a higher realm, but he was helpless because he had to continue fighting in order to pass at the same time as Luo Fan broke through. The entire world seemed to have changed slightly. Waves of powerful auras came from all directions. These auras were also the auras of level 3 pseudo-sages that had never appeared before. Luo Fan had already sensed such changes many times. He instantly knew that these were the living creatures that he had killed previously being resurrected. At the same time, they had also broken through their original limits and reached level 3 pseudo-sages. Luo Fan, who was looking forward to the changes that were going to happen next, did not dare to be polite. He did not dare to ignore Baiwa and Hu Yun and directly pounce towards the auras. Although he could not destroy this world, his speed had returned to its peak. To him, hundreds of millions of miles was just a blink of an eye. Soon, he had already found the location of the first aura. Chapter 1338. There was a figure that Luo Fan was very familiar with sitting cross-legged where he had appeared. Looking at this figure, Luo Fan suddenly felt like he was looking at a mirror. That's right, that figure was Luo Fan himself. How is this possible? I haven't left, and I'm not dead yet. Luo Fan looked at this figure, his mind in turmoil. He could barely keep his composure. At this moment, Baiwa and Hu Yun caught up and appeared next to Luo Fan. How is this possible? Baiwa's expression changed drastically at this moment. She looked at Luo Fan, then at that figure, her face filled with disbelief. Luo Fan originally planned to listen to Baiwa's explanation of the situation, but when he suddenly heard Baiwa spit out such a sentence, his complexion changed, and he said, "Has this never happened before?" "Never," Baiwa said resolutely. "At least, I've gone through this stage many times, but I've never encountered myself here." "Never encountered?" Perhaps that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. Luo Fan's expression gradually returned to normal. Now that the situation was like this, all he could do was accept it. It was just a waste of time to let his imagination run wild, and guess what the reason was? Luo Fan was already experienced in dealing with himself. Back when he unified the island, wasn't the saint's test to have an identical version of himself? Moreover, that version of himself was created by the saint, compared to this other version of himself created by some unknown existence. It was clearly more perfect. Even under such circumstances, he was able to emerge victorious, let alone this other version of himself that was not far away from him. The reason why he was surprised before was because the current situation wasn't within his expectations. He wasn't really afraid of the other him in front of him. "Since you don't know, then let's kill it first," Luo Fan said calmly. As he spoke, he took a step forward and arrived in front of that figure. At this moment, in this instant, the figure suddenly opened his eyes. He smiled and said, "I didn't expect you to finally come. I've been waiting for you for so long." Luo Fan frowned. He couldn't be bothered to say anything more and raised his hand to slap him. With his slap, a passageway shot out from his hand and directly enveloped that figure. Right at this moment, the figure's body suddenly swayed. It was as if he had turned into a phantom. No matter how the passageway attacked, no matter how hard it tried to envelop him, he was not affected in the slightest. It looked like it was in a completely different time dimension from the tunnel. Or perhaps it was two completely different space-time. Faced with such a situation, Luo Fan's expression changed. In an instant, he knew that this existence had a deep understanding of the laws of this world. It was not inferior to him. It was impossible for him to use the rules of this world to deal with it. Understanding this, Luo Fan made a prompt decision. He turned his hand, and in an instant, an unparalleled power condensed in his right hand. This power contained absolute destruction and annihilation. There were even vaguely countless worlds contained within it. Together with the destruction and annihilation, it formed a strange form that slapped at his other self. This time, the figure couldn't dodge as casually as before. The expression on his face changed slightly, and he also used a palm to block Luo Fan. This block, the way the power was formed, and even the shape of the worlds were exactly the same as the one Luo Fan had unleashed. They looked exactly the same. One could imagine the effect of such a collision of palms. Terrifying shockwaves spread in all directions. However, while these shockwaves might have been able to destroy space-time in other places, they only shattered the surrounding mountain rocks and created a huge crater. As for space-time and the nomological laws, they were not affected by the terrifying shockwaves. They were still as calm and natural as before. The two of them had used exactly the same techniques, and their power was also exactly the same. One could imagine the result of such a collision. The two were locked in a stalemate and instantly annihilated each other. Neither one was able to suppress the other. When everything calmed down and the shockwaves dispersed, two Luo Fans appeared in front of Inbaiwa and Hu Yun, standing opposite each other. Their figures and movements were almost exactly the same. Only their expressions were slightly different. Luo Fan frowned, as if he had encountered a difficult problem. On the other hand, Luo Fan, who was opposite him, looked a little excited, as if he had encountered something very interesting. Only the difference in their expressions told Inbaiwa and Hu Yun which was the real Luo Fan, and which was the clone of Luo Fan that was born in this world. "Don't you want to know what will happen if I defeat you?" The other Luo Fan smirked. "I don't want to know." Luo Fan frowned. "You don't want to know? Or do you already know?" The other Luo Fan was still smirking. His expression was rather annoying, making it difficult for others to equate this person with Luo Fan. Luo Fan indeed knew long ago. This was not difficult to guess. To the living beings born in this world, as long as they could kill enough living beings, they would be able to obtain freedom and live independently of this world. According to this logic, if the existence in front of him killed him, it would definitely be able to completely replace his identity while gaining its freedom. It might even be able to leave him in this world and replace his identity. He would then be toyed with by this world and be used to deal with the people who came after him. Although the other Luo Fan was only a clone of this world, he still had Luo Fan's memories, strength, and even intelligence. Naturally, he could guess what Luo Fan was thinking. He laughed loudly and said, "Good, good, good. Seems like you really know everything. This is interesting. This is interesting." At this moment, Inbaiwa and Hu Yun's expressions changed slightly. This time, they weren't here because of the two Luo Fans. Instead, it was because there were two auras and two living beings that were rushing towards them at high speed. Due to the stimulation from seeing the two Luo fan clones, they could clearly feel that the other two beings had auras that belonged to them. The other two beings had an aura that belonged to them, or rather, they had an aura that was almost exactly the same as them. Such a situation clearly meant that the person who had rushed over was very likely to be the same as Luo Fan's clone. He was also a clone of them. Sure enough, the two silhouettes soon appeared in front of everyone. In fact, they directly appeared next to the clone of Luo Fan. It was the other Imbaiwa and the other Huyun. The three of them were floating in the air. They looked almost identical to the way Luo Fan and the other two were floating in the air. The only difference was, the three of them looked rather excited, as if they had waited for the chance they had been dreaming of. At this moment, Luo Fan clearly felt that the two gazes from above seemed to have focused on him. It was as if an existence that he could not understand was paying more attention to him. Even Imbaiwa and Huyun, who were at the side, seemed to have a subtle feeling. They felt like they were being spied on. However, this feeling was too vague for them. Even the two of them could not help but think that it was an illusion. They did not really pay attention to it. After all, at this moment, what was more important to them was the other self in front of them. There's something wrong with the situation this time. Imbaiwa said, "Do you have a clue?" Luo Fan asked softly. "No. In my previous experience, I'm afraid that even the 6th level wouldn't be as difficult as this level." Imbaiwa said solemnly, "It seems that there has really been a change." Luo Fan sighed. There are some things that you should have known a long time ago. You just didn't think too much about it. Especially you, the other me. Don't tell me you really can't think of these things?" At this moment, the other Luo Fan spoke. He chuckled with a fanatical expression, as if he was possessed. Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. He could not help but feel an indescribable sense of foreboding. Because Imbaiwa and Huyun did not understand what the other him was saying, he could not be any clearer. The two gazes that had been staring at him since he stepped into this level were like blades that were floating above his head. They could fall down at any moment and separate his head from his body. To him, this was like a huge rock pressing down on his heart. Although he did not think about this matter all the time, he had always remembered this matter in his heart. Who was the owner of that line of sight? What was its purpose? Why was it looking at him? Was it the one who opened all these checkpoints? What was its purpose in opening all these checkpoints? All these questions had been lingering in his heart. The situation in front of him was obviously related to the fundamental purpose of the existence of these checkpoints. And it was very likely that it was not something good. "I can't guess what it is," Luo Fan said calmly. "Perhaps you can answer my doubts." "You can't guess?" "Ha, if I can guess it, why can't you?" The other Luo Fan laughed loudly. When these words were said, even Imbaiwa and Huyun, who were standing next to Luo Fan, had their expressions changed slightly. After all, the one who spoke was another Luo Fan. To a certain extent, it represented Luo Fan. Its thoughts, and its mentality all belonged to Luo Fan. Since it said this, then it was very likely that Luo Fan really did know the truth. When everything was shrouded in mystery, if someone suddenly said that there was someone beside them who knew the truth, then others would either feel reliant on this person who knew the truth, or they would feel suspicious. "Why don't I know the truth, but you do? Is this related to you? Are you scheming behind the scenes?" These kinds of thoughts were unavoidable. Although Imbaiwa and Huyun weren't ordinary people, they wouldn't easily suspect Luo Fan and suspect that these levels were part of Luo Fan's scheme. However, they would naturally have their own thoughts. Luo Fan's expression changed slightly. "Some things are just guesses. They can't be confirmed." He clung to his own words and said calmly, "It's already like this. Are we still guessing?" The other Luo Fan chuckled. The aura on his body surged, and a formidable power slowly radiated from his body. It gradually constructed millions of strange worlds around his body. These worlds, it was like a suit of armor attached to his body. Each world was like a tiny dot on the suit of armor. After being densely packed together, it was impossible to tell that it was a world by itself. Instead, it could only be seen that it was an indescribably powerful suit of armor. Coming back from the dead, Was it really that simple? This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He sighed, and his body was enveloped in the same armor as his other self. However, it was no longer the time to talk, seeing that they weren't interested in continuing. Although Baiwa and Hu Yun were still curious. However, they also focused their minds. They began to face their other selves from a distance. Their auras slowly rose, and they clashed with each other. They wanted to gain as much advantage as possible before the battle. You're not going to say it. Since the matter is there, let me replace you. Let me find out if this method is feasible. The other Luo Fan laughed out loud. Then his figure flashed, and he charged at Luo Fan while being enveloped by the world armor. His speed was beyond the limit of speed. Time-space matter. Energy couldn't affect him at all. As soon as he moved, he appeared next to Luo Fan in an instant. He threw a punch at Luo Fan's chest. This punch contained the power of countless worlds. In other places, it was enough to completely destroy hundreds of thousands of worlds. Even in the demon realm, it was enough to completely shatter an island-sized space. However, here, it was only a punch. In the face of this punch, Luo Fan was equally unceremonious. His fist blasted out as if he wanted to punch his other self. Both of them had the same level of martial arts attainments. If they were to fight, even if both of them could display unimaginably exquisite moves, they would still have to face each other in the end. Both of them were very sure of this. Because of this, both of them completely abandoned all the changes in their moves. Instead, they just used clever but clumsy methods and punched each other. During this process, both of them had completely integrated all of their cultivation achievements into every single move and every single move. They were competing with their own cultivation, their own comprehension, and their own speed of improvement. On the other hand, Baiwa and Hu Yun's battle with their other selves was completely different. Their battle techniques were truly magnificent to the extreme. Almost every move they made was filled with all sorts of mysterious techniques. Even every breath they took was filled with endless godly might. Compared to Luo Fan's side, which was like two mortals punching and kicking each other, countless worlds were born and destroyed in their battlefields. Countless strange lights flickered and darkness surged. All kinds of strange magical abilities were displayed, and hundreds of millions of methods that were enough to destroy the world were constantly displayed. The battles on the three battlefields were so fierce that the commotion produced was truly immense. This place wasn't too remote to begin with. Who knew how many creatures were hiding in the surroundings? Now that such a huge commotion had occurred, those hidden creatures began to quickly gather in this location. All of them hid nearby, wanted to be the fishermen who would benefit from the fight between cranes and clams. Their arrival was really a blessing from heaven for Baiwa and Hu Yun. Because the two of them had used Luo Fan as the main force in the previous battles, the strength that they could exert at this time had not reached their peak. Both of them had just barely stepped into the pseudo-sage realm. They were able to hold their other selves off because they were too familiar with their other selves and knew their respective methods. Now that so many outsiders had arrived, how could they still be polite? Taking advantage of the opportunity to defend against the attack of the other self, the two of them killed the living beings hiding nearby one by one, thereby obtaining the blessing of heaven and earth. As a result, the strength that they could exert continued to increase, and they continued to surpass the level of pseudo-sage grade 1. Perhaps it was due to the limitations of the two of them that Hu Yun and Baiwa were only equivalent to level 2 pseudo-sane at the beginning. Although they were stronger than them, they weren't strong enough to completely crush them and make it impossible for them to resist. It was precisely because of this that they were able to kill the living beings that were spying on them from the side, and that gave them the opportunity to improve themselves. Soon, the strength that Baiwa and Hu Yun could exert had broken through the limit and stepped into the level of level 2 pseudo-sage. The moment they stepped into that level, the situation of their respective battles began to gradually reverse. They were both level 2 pseudo-sage, and they were so familiar with their opponents. Naturally, there wasn't much difference in their combat strength with their opponents. In this way, how could they still be at a disadvantage?